2016 budget cycle. We welcome our colleagues from the Board of Selectmen here for our joint hearing, and we're going to ask Mr. Tetreau, our first selectman, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Tonight, as we begin the budget cycle, we'll hear a summary budget presentation by the first selectman. We will also hear three items tonight: our active medical insurance evaluations and costs, OPEB, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits costs, and pension costs. And all these items have been used, and this analysis has been used in the formulation of the proposed budget. Once again, we want to welcome, the Board of Finance wants to welcome our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen. This is always a busy and hectic time, and we spend a lot of time with them at this point of the year. We also want to extend our appreciation to the town administration, the department heads, the Board of Education, and the Education Administration for their fine efforts in putting these budget books together. There's a lot of information to go through, and a lot of hard work and planning goes through this from October all the way through today and into the first part of April. We also want to extend specifically our appreciation to the financial teams at both the town side, Mrs. Gardner, and the Board of Education for all their hard work and effort in compiling this information and putting it together in usable formats for us. It's hard to do that as well as your day jobs, and you do that very well each and every year. Before we get started, for the next 12 or 13 meetings or so, I wanted to speak a little bit about what our expectations are. For our presenters, we thank them for coming to us. We ask them to be prepared to answer all the questions they can, openly, honestly, and completely, and to help us with follow-up items as we leave the table so that we can make more informed decisions later in the process. As board members, that we be respectful to our presenters, that we be equally prepared, that we be open-minded, and that we keep our good humor and good cheer as the process goes on, as your chairman screws up, and as we listen to a lot of interesting debate and dialogue. And to members of the public, we ask that you be engaged in this process. We ask that you be equally respectful and courteous of each other, of board members, of the administration, and most importantly, of differing points of view. That is what makes a democracy very special. We ask that you be non-repetitive, so if somebody has already said what you want to say and the hour grows late, that you just say, I concur with the earlier speaker. That you be non-personal. Sometimes things get personal, and this would call for all of us, both our presenters, our board members, as well as the public, and that we keep it non-personal and on the facts at hand. I would also ask that nobody jump to conclusions based on a question or even a set of questions. This is a fact-gathering situation. This is not a judgmental situation at this point, and I think it moves us all to keep that in mind when questions are asked and answered, that doesn't necessarily signal something further on down the road. I will let the public know that, and I think I can speak for all my colleagues and myself, as well as the Board of Selectmen, we do read the emails that we get throughout this process. So feel free to email us, as you have been, and as I know you will, throughout the course of the deliberations. Unfortunately, they're so voluminous, and it's so easy to send so many emails nowadays that it's next to impossible to answer them all. That does not mean that we are not listening and not reading them. Same thing with your comments. We do listen to them. We do solicit them. We did add in the Saturday morning session so that people that weren't able to get out at night would also be able to participate in this. And as for public comment, there's been a little bit of consternation about this. I've received several phone calls about public comment, and here's how we handle that. Each night, after each department, we will allow for public comment. Public comment does not mean public question. It means public comment to comment on what you've heard through the course of the presentations. We also have the Saturday morning session, which I forget. Caitlin, do you know the specific date of that? 29th. The 29th? Thank you, Bob. The Saturday morning session is especially set aside for additional public comment for anyone who would like to participate. And public comment is only not allowed at our executive sessions, which I think we have 2 nights of them at the end of the budget process. One where the board can get together and discuss amongst ourselves what we've heard, and the next night for voting. So with that, I thank everybody for their participation and their good humor. And I ask if anybody has any other comments they would like to make before I turn the floor over to our first selectman. Seeing none, thank you, and Mr. Tetreau, welcome.
Handouts? Take these and pass them.
Yes, I think we do.
Tom, I do have a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. Folks in the front row, I feel like at SeaWorld, you know, if you sit in the first 2 rows, you may get wet. In this case, if you sit in the first 2 seats, you are going to have your eyes blinded by the light here.
Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. Thanks, Nancy. You can push them to the side. What? Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Can you put your copies for the public up there if you don't have them?
Good, thank you, Tom. And special thanks to my technical team, Nancy Burns.
I wasn't going to walk all the way back. There's only so much up there. And that would be me.
All right, just to clarify, everybody get a copy of the handouts that wants one? Good, all right. All right, then let's get started, assuming I can do all the technical stuff here. There we go. I'm going to cover some opening remarks, an overview of the budget, some history and trends, and then a comparison to some other towns. This is the third budget that I've presented. Each one's been a different challenge. But I do want to start off by thanking the department managers, and especially our finance department that worked so hard in putting this together. A big thank you to Dr. Title and the school administration for their work in putting together the Board of Ed budget. And a thank you to all our volunteers who contribute their time to make our town special, and especially the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, for the opportunity to present here tonight. We've had some challenges recently. When you look at the big picture, the economy is still recovering from the recession. We've had our share of hurricanes and snowstorms. We found PCBs in our schools. We've had to deal with unfunded state mandates, especially special education. We've got concerns about public safety and school security. We've had slower than historic growth in our grand list, and we've had minimal growth in our non-tax revenues. On the positive side, we have a strong financial foundation. Our budget cost drivers are becoming more manageable. We have a full AAA rating, restored and validated. We have a strong local economy with low commercial vacancy rates. We have a vibrant downtown with restaurants, arts, culture, and entertainment. We've really become the destination spot for the region. When you look at our vision, We're a family-friendly, neighborhood-oriented community that values our top-quality school system. We're committed to keeping our town and schools safe and secure. We help our seniors stay in town with expanded senior tax relief and provide services so that they enjoy living here. We're a destination for culture, arts, dining, entertainment, and shopping for the region. We're a leader in energy conservation and sustainability. We continue to strengthen our financial foundation and make responsible decisions about our long-term obligations. We honor our rich heritage and continue to preserve our historic character. We value and respect our open space, parks, beaches, and recreational opportunities. We want Fairfield to be a good value for all who live here, both today and tomorrow. Let's review our budget objectives. We want to manage our expenses and still provide high-quality services to our residents. We've got one new initiative that's planned, which is a plan for enhanced school security. This proposal is still being completed and will be in addition to this budget. Chief McNamara, Dr. Title, Fire Marshal Kessler have diligently worked in drafting these proposals. School security is too important to rush. We've had discussions about how to present this, especially with items that need to be kept confidential. We've followed up on state guidelines that have seemed to be changing every few weeks. We've talked to other towns, and the goal here is to share best practices. I heard a draft of this proposal for the first time last Monday, and I'm meeting again with Dr. Title and Chief McNamara tomorrow to see what we can finalize. Once I've got that, I will be talking with Chairman Flynn, and we'll schedule the appropriate time to have this come before the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. Moving on, there's no significant reduction in essential services in this budget. We fund our long-term obligations for pension, OPEB, retiree medical, and surplus. We provide the support and funding for our top-quality school system, and we continue to strengthen our financial foundation. Now on to the budget. I'm recommending a budget of just over $286 million, which represents a 2.67% increase in the mill rate. This budget includes, again, just over $156 million for the Board of Ed to support, maintain our highly valued and highly recognized school system. This represents a 3.32% increase on the Board of Ed budget. And overall, from the initial requests I've received, I've reduced them by almost $4 million. With respect to the Board of Ed recommendation, Board of Ed is our largest budget driver. It represents 61% of the overall increase this year. And I'm recommending an $800,000 reduction to that request. $200,000 due to decreased pension contribution, $200,000 due to lower electricity costs, and $4,000 for the Board of Ed to find savings in other areas. There are some additional school costs in this budget. Certain of these costs that are included on the town side of the budget. Those include debt service, workers' comp, insurance, liability insurance and errors omissions insurance, school nurses, crossing guards, dare, and school resource officers, purchasing support, unemployment insurance, finance, Department of Public Works, and a few other expenses, but for a total of almost $24 million on the town side that goes to support the Board of Ed. When you add these in, these town costs, the total cost for our schools is just over $180 million. This is a number that we report every year to the state. This represents approximately 63% of our overall budget. This makes the strongest statement I can think of about our commitment to education. Let's look at some of the other cost drivers. In addition to the Board of Ed, the top three drivers are pension, OPEB, and salaries, OPEB being retiree medical insurance. Pension costs should be stable after the next few years according to projections. And overall, our cost drivers are more stable and are experiencing slower growth than we've seen in the past few years. Our employee labor unions have worked with this administration to agree on settlements that contributed to slower growth in labor costs. In addition to that, we've got a number of cost-saving measures and productivity improvements that have come into play. Our energy conservation and use of sustainable fuels literally is saving millions of dollars. Healthcare services that we bid out last year were a major reduction in last year's budget and continue this year. Recent labor union settlements, as I mentioned, have helped us control costs. Electricity and fuel cost purchases. We've got a program in place that we look at futures purchasing, track what's happening, and have been successful in making some very good buys at the right time. We've got ticketing and permit software and technology used by the police and parking authority. Our tax collection software, after a few speed bumps, is now up and running and starting to achieve some improved service levels across the board. We'll have a new town website coming on soon. And then our safety committee and increased training has been a big part in reducing our workers' comp expense, and you'll see that in the current budget. We do have some personnel adjustments in this budget. Health Department, we're looking at adding 3 part-time employees to meet state mandates for care of students. And Sands Cleary, our health director, will give you more background on that. In the Finance Department, we're looking at adding 1 part-time position to address the auditor recommendation that you heard about just this past January. And in the IT Department, we're looking at a half year of a full-time position to support network and the new phone system project. Wanted to take a minute and look at take a little bit of time and talk about trends. You know, we talk a lot about where we are, but I thought it might be good for everybody to get a background and understand a little bit about how we got here. We looked at 2003 to 2013. 2013 was picked because that's the last full year that we have actuals for. 2014 we're in the middle of, and 2015 is proposed. So 2013 is our most recent year. So let's take a look at what we have. One question I get a lot is the population, which in the last 10 years has really been pretty flat, 57,000 to just over 59,000. Our total expenses have gone up from 168 million to over 270 million. On a per capita basis, that's $2,917 per person in 2003 versus $4,555 per person this year. When you look at the town business, much like the Board of Ed is really focused on the number of students to define their costs, the town is really focused on the number of people. It also gives us a way to compare how we do versus other towns of differing population size, and that will come into play in a little bit. You can see our pension contribution has gone from 0 to over $5 million. You can see our OPEB contribution has gone from just under $2 million to almost $9 million a year. Meanwhile, our employee count has gone from 471 employees back in 2003 down to 465. So we actually have fewer people today than we did 10 years ago. Board of Ed expenses, you can see, increased from 93 million to 148 million. Property tax revenue also has gone up. And again, the tax revenue per capita has gone from $2,540 to $4,209 per person. Average salary for employees over a 10-year period has gone from $51,000 to just over $67,000. You can see in the next line why we're so focused on health insurance, because that's gone from just under $8,000, $7,698, to over $21,000 per employee. And then lastly, our debt service general fund has gone from $12 million a year, to $22 million a year. And that's part of our challenge there has been the build-out of the schools. We've seen it all happen from, again, 2003. Remember, we're just starting to build out the schools. Those projects will come into play, and we're still carrying that debt service today. Turning the page. If we look at that from a slightly different perspective, we see that between 2003 and 2013, we added $102 million to the budget. Board of Education accounts for $55 million of that. Debt service is another $10 million. Health insurance is $14 million of that. OPEB is $7 million of that. Pension is $5,500,000, and employee salary is about $7 million. So the $100 million, that breaks out to actually just under $100 million in those totals, but you can see the major components of the budget increase over that 10-year period. Some good news, we're moving in the right direction. The 5-year period from 2011 to 2015, including this year's budget, will see the lowest expense and tax rate growth in the past 20 years. Most importantly, we're now funding our long-term obligations that were not fully included in many of the past year's budgets. And looking at how we stand against other towns, a couple of snapshots. One looks at Fairfield, Greenwich, West Hartford, and Westport. You can see comparable populations, but you also see that Westport has less than half the number of people we have. But when we look at expenses per person or per capita, we can take a look at how we're doing in terms of the cost of delivering services to our residents. We're at $4,500. Greenwich is at $5,700. West Hartford just over $4,000 per capita per person. And Westport is up at just under $7,000 per person. You can see how that translates into taxes per capita. To fund that, we have $4,209. Greenwich, $5,198. West Hartford, $3,328. West Hartford gets some additional state aid that is not available to the towns down here. And Westport at $6,428 per capita. And moving on to another snapshot with a couple of addition towns, this is an update of a chart that we handed out right before the RTM vote last April. And we wanted to see where Fairfield's tax increase stood at 2.4% versus Trumbull's, as you can see, at 1.88%, Greenwich at 2.75%, Westport at 0.9%, and Shelton at 0%. And so one of the questions is, kind of how did they do that? Well, you can see that we funded our pension arc, funded our OPEB arc, and not only didn't use surplus to decrease our taxes, but added money in our budget. Trumbull didn't fully fund their pension, didn't fully fund OPEB, and took money out of surplus to achieve that tax rate. Greenwich, fully funded pension, didn't fully fund their OPEB in that year. They've been pretty good about that in the past, and did use surplus to lower their tax increase. Westport, fully funded their pension, fully funded OPEB, did use money from their surplus. As many of you know, the Westport budget in this past few months has been found to be missing just over $2 million in OPEB funding that was somehow left out of the calculations for last year's budget. So that 0.9%, when you add in $2 million, or about 1.3%, would be actually closer to 2.2% overall if they'd fully included that funding, which was their intention. Shelton's at 0%. You can see that they aren't funding their pension fully, aren't funding OPEB fully, and are using surplus to do that. I just thought this would be a good update from the information we provided. So where does that leave us? In summary, this budget strikes a balance between a tax increase and needed investments. We've got a commitment to meet our long-term obligations. It shows the negotiated labor agreements are saving the town money. It shows this town is committed to supporting high-quality education and a high-quality school system, and it shows that Fairfield is the best value in Fairfield County. Thank you for the chance to present tonight. And Nance, I think we need your help to turn this down.
Would board members please return to class?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tetreau. I'm going to turn it over to the board now for any questions while we have Mr. Tetreau up here. I know I have a couple. Anyone? Mr. Becker?
Thank you. Just a couple things. On the department, you had noted about $3.8 million in reductions. I'm wondering if we can get, outside of the budget book, actually a little bit more detail on the original department requests. My understanding is actually dating back a couple of months ago, they start handing in their actual requests with some more detail. There's a couple different rounds with some of those departments. I think it would be helpful if we could actually get that information to the board, not just simply the kind of summarized versions which are in the budget book. That's, I guess, the first thing.
Yeah, just to be clear, I believe all the dollar reductions are included in the line items, so you have that as a starting point. And then in terms of the information, I don't know, Linda, I don't know what else we have. I'd have to ask Ms. Gardner what we have beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get back as well, that's fine. But anything relating to those requests, any sort of worksheets, anything like that,
Let me
that
just
come back.
Yeah, and let me just clarify. I believe the backup, we don't subtract anything out of the backup to this, so if you have the backup for the budget, I don't know if we Tom, I think you had us email that out to folks last year.
Yes.
Would that be acceptable to do again?
Yes, it would, absolutely.
And I believe that addresses the point that Mr. Becker is asking.
If that, yeah, no, I know that the detail component, yeah, if we can get that, and that'd be helpful, but I'm asking if there's anything outside of there, any sort of worksheets, anything like that they submit, and if there are, if we can get them.
Yeah, we can we can email the cut list.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you. The other item is on the $23.9 million of the additional school expenses. Appreciate somebody, piecing that together. I think that's very helpful. And I would just ask if you have anything, again, in more detail. Perfect.
That, just to be clear, that actually comes off a form that the town files with the state each and every year. So that's not necessarily new information. It's just
Okay.
we included here, I think, for the first time.
Okay. I thought so. I wasn't sure if there was anything else you had added to it. If not, then there's nothing else you have to add in there. One other thing, and this isn't so much specifically to the first selectman, but more in general on the board side, and I think it's, at least for me, it'll be kind of a recurring theme through budget season. One of the things that we keep coming across is every department that comes here seems to present sort of a different set of towns, and there's some that are based on demographics, some based on the county that we're in. It may just be helpful if we can, at least in my view, attempt as a board or joint board, but attempt to come up with a more standardized sort of set and some kind of logic behind that benchmark. I'm not asking to address that tonight, but it's certainly every time I see these, I sort of say to myself, it's helpful, but it'd be good if we had sort of a better, more standard thing. So each department that comes in is always sort of following that, so we can kind of keep steady benchmarks. So it's
I think your point's well taken. The two departments I know of are the Board of Ed and the town that kind of do this. The Board of Ed has done it for a number of years with their org. I think we have just started to doing it.
It's ERG, isn't it?
I'm sorry, you
DERG, thank you. There it is.
right.
so I think we came to the same conclusion, so the idea is to establish our comparison group, certainly run those towns by the Board of Finance, because it's one part towns like ours, and it's one part towns we want to see, because we know they're well managed, that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, of course.
So I think from that standpoint, very definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Other questions from board members? Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just back to the school expenses, the certain school costs that are included in the town budget. Those costs, as you list them, is that consistent with other towns?
On one hand, I'm going to say I don't know, because I haven't looked at the costs for other towns. On the other hand, I'm going to suggest yes, because I believe we all fill out the same form. It's a standard state form that includes those. So the costs on there shouldn't be a surprise or shouldn't be different. But I haven't looked at any other towns'
I'm curious. I would assume it is, but I'd be curious.
It's the same form we're filling out. It's the same form we're filing with the state each year.
Okay. And just question on the challenges. That last bullet point, minimal growth in non-tax revenues, that comes up during the budget season every year. I don't know if there's an answer for that, but have you or your administration have given any additional thought into that over the past year on how to increase it? Increase revenues outside of residential taxes.
Yeah, I think there are several things going on there. One is that when you look at historically, and part of that was the comparison that we looked at, if you go back, things like conveyance tax were up at $2.5 million. You know, now we're hoping they're up at 1.3 or 1.4, kind of in that range. So even though they're growing as opposed to a couple years ago, they're nowhere near back to where they were. Building permits, definitely growing because of all the work going on, especially in the beach area right now, but not back to the level that they were. Golf permits, golf has kind of taken I don't want me to say a dive, but certainly golf is not as hot a sport as it was 10 or 15 years ago. So there's a little bit less activity going on there, though our golf commission has done a good job and probably done the best job I can think of going out doing a market analysis, what other clubs are charging, what drives their rounds versus resident rounds versus out-of-town rounds. I'm very impressed with the analysis they've put together. So we'll continue to look at that as part of it, no question.
Okay. I just add one last point, is that the cost drivers, basically the same year after year. They don't seem to change much, do they?
Well, when you look at the titles of the cost drivers,
They're the same. I mean, you have some, like workman's comp is down where last year it was up.
well, for the last few years it's been up, so being down is a big trend difference.
Yeah.
Yes.
But after workman's comp, would you say that most of the cost drivers remain the same?
Well, the big four are always going to be the same: salaries, pension, insurance, and OPEB.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the big four. Board of Ed, because it's our biggest department, is going to, so that's 5 out of the 10 or so that are always going to be there. You can see that health insurance is increasing at a lower rate than it has been, one part due to the bid that we went out to and got lower prices on that, and one part due to the employees are now picking up a higher cost, higher share of that. So both are having an impact on that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. DeWitt, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tetreau. Board of Ed recommendations. I'm quoting, "I'm recommending an $800,000 reduction in Board of Ed, $200,000 due to decreased pension contribution." Are you recommending that we don't fully fund that pension? Is that what that statement means?
No, the latest recommendation from our actuary as to what we should do saw a drop of $200,000 in pension. So it's a reduction in cost. So it's one of the things that can be reduced without impacting programs.
Okay. So Dr. Title's budget has a number in there
It's
prior
new-
to the actuary's numbers.
It's
and
newer
that's what
information,
it is.
correct. It's newer information than the Board of Ed had.
Got
So
it.
when they voted on it, they didn't know this. So we're basically catching up.
Catching up. Got it. Thank you.
Same thing with electricity.
Right.
We had some updated information on that, so we don't need to budget as much for that.
Okay. So the bottom line there is the Board of Ed is on the hook for $400,000. That's the kicker there.
Correct.
The other 2 line items are just newer information.
Correct.
The electricity costs, right. Got it. Thank you.
All right. I have a couple questions then, if I can jump in.
I'll go after you.
Okay. I'm going to reference a couple of your slides. Can I go to slide 19, which is, for those of you in the audience with, that can't read the page numbers, it's 10-year history comparison. Thank you for the slide. It was pretty informative.
Well, Tom, it's actually a slide that you and I tried to put together a few years back when we were both on the Board of Finance. So it's been something I've been curious about for a while, and we finally were able to put it together.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you for that. What I'd like to do is see if we can expand it a little bit now that we have it. And all I'm looking for is percentages. Can we get the average annual increase and then the 10-year increase for the period of time? I think both those would be very revealing. And what would really be interesting is the opportunity to benchmark those to the extent we can, particularly in things like salary, pension, and medical costs, benchmark it against other municipalities, as well as benchmark it against what's going on in the private sector, because quite frankly, who's paying the bills are the taxpayers. So it'd be really interesting for some of these to understand, when they sit here like this, they're pretty revealing, but it's tough to know what the context is
Yep.
that these increases are in.
Yeah, the percentages we can provide, because we looked at those, it just,
Right.
at some point, both time constraints and
Yeah,
my
I get it.
limited technical capability kept us from fitting them all on one PowerPoint slide.
Yeah, no,
The
it's,
only thing you're asking for that I think wouldn't, we can certainly provide, but it's not going to be helpful, is the growth on pension and OPEB, because we go from not funding to funding. So it's not actual growth in terms of what's taken place. We have it and can provide it, I don't
Sure.
mean that. But it's when you go from 0 to 5.5 million.
absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. No, and I appreciate that. I just want to see where it comes out, so.
Yep, so did I, so yes.
Yeah, thank you. And then on the next slide, the 10-year expense growth, the exact same thing, really. It's good information, but to know what percentage increase that is. And in fairness to...
Actually, since it's roughly $100 million,
Yeah,
the 55 million is going to be roughly 55%. We can still provide it for everything else, but
Yeah, you're
basically,
right.
The
You're
numbers
absolutely
work.
right
The
there.
numbers work. So for a quick and dirty percentage, just translate the dollars to percentages.
yeah, but I was actually thinking of the individual amounts, not of the actual, so pension of pension, right? It might not be the exact same percentage.
Oh, not a percentage of
Of
this
the
growth.
total, no.
Percentage of how much.
So for example, pension, we've got a $5.5 million increase. What does that represent? Now, in that instance, it's going to represent 100% because we weren't funding it back in 2003. We are funding it in 2013. For debt service, it's going to be 40 or 50%. For health insurance, it's going to be 200 and some odd percent. So it's really what the percentage increase is of those specific costs,
Correct.
not of the total.
Yeah, some of that would be the, well, we can talk more, I don't mean to tie it up here, but
Yeah.
my question would be, and some of those numbers you're asking would be the percentages you get on the other page when you ask for the 10-year growth and
Mm-hmm.
the annual growth.
Yes, not all of them,
Let us
though.
format that, get it back to you, and then you can edit that, and we'll accommodate what you need.
That's fine. And the only other thing I'd say is on the 10-year history comparison, only because someone on the Board of Education is going to bring it up, we should probably add another stat on there, which is growth in number of students on the 10-year percentage, right? Because people are going to ask about that.
Well, and then we can also include cost per student, I believe, but,
Yep.
and again, some of that was covered in Dr. Title's, but we can certainly consolidate it all on one chart and make that as helpful as you'd like.
Yep, thank you. And the last item is, and it's just for clarity, because it was referenced a couple times in the presentation. So the negotiated labor agreements that you're speaking of that have already been done are actually, they're all up for renewal right now. Or I don't want to say all, that's a dangerous word. Many of them,
4 out of 7.
right, are being renegotiated now.
Correct.
Correct?
The other 3
Retroactive.
end in June 30th.
Right. And any potential adjustment to those, and I'm not asking dollar figures, but any potential adjustment for moving forward is included in the budget document, correct?
I'm going to say yes, and we can cover that at another time, but
Right, right. In other words, we're not going to have.
you say any potential adjustment, that's where I get,
Okay.
okay. But yes,
Let
we
me
have,
be more
we have,
precise.
we have made.
Allowances.
Correct.
For increased
For
costs.
settlements, correct,
Due to settlements that aren't complete yet.
correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Mr. Walsh, my apologies.
No, no
Go right
problem.
ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Tetreau. Thanks for your presentation. In regards to your budget, are there any services that we're not going to be providing anymore that we provided last year?
Again, same question, is when you say any,
Yes, any?
not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Will we be providing the same level? To some degree, we can't. We didn't replace the books in the library. We increased it, but we did not replace the entire cut from last year. So to the extent that it will be better than last year, but not back to where it was 2 years ago.
Okay. In regards to new initiatives or new services that we're providing, are there any that are in your budget?
None that have a major cost impact. We're certainly looking at how we improve productivity and service levels with the resources and dollars that we have, but no major cost initiatives from that standpoint. Let me take the new website. That's been worked on part-time by Kathleen Griffin in my office and Mary Mao over at the library. Mary Mao now, sorry. And that has progressed over this past year. However, with the reduction in staff in my office, it hasn't progressed as fast. We'd hope to bring that out sooner. We now hope to get out in the next couple months.
Okay.
So I don't mean to say no new initiatives, but certainly they're limited. There's no big cost initiative, that type of thing. I didn't, we're trying to keep our departments operating within their resources and focused, as the cliche is, doing more with less. So we're looking for how we improve service levels within that.
Okay. And with the services that we supplied from last year to this year, what are the main areas where we're going to be having a decrease in service versus an increase in service?
Again, not a major adjustment at this point.
In anything?
Not a major adjustment. You know, when you say anything, I just, you know, but not a major adjustment, not that I saw. And
Up or
not that
down,
I-
not a major adjustment?
Not that I discussed with the department heads.
Okay. You have a slide that you discussed wherein you're talking about where you have increased staffing.
Yes.
I think it was slide 17.
Correct.
In your budget, are those the only positions that are being added? 3 part-time positions in the health department, 1 part-time position in the finance department, and a half-year a full-time position in the IT department?
At the moment, those are the only positions, and they're correct.
When you say the moment, are you planning on adding anything additional than those?
I'm expecting there'll be some adjustment to that when we look at the school security proposal and plan when that comes before us.
Okay. Are we cutting back staff in any areas?
I don't think so.
So net-net, your proposal is to have 3 additional part-timers in health, 1 in finance, and then a half position in IT. Other than that, everybody else stays the same from the previous year.
Correct.
I have no more questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anybody else? Seeing none. Mr. Tetreau, thank you. Thank you for the time that went before the presentation. Question, is this presentation going to be available on the town website?
This PowerPoint? Absolutely.
Okay, so that'll be up there tomorrow or within? Okay, and also to our clerk, can we make sure that we get any documents that we get here forwarded to the town clerk's office, so I think, make sure they get posted on the website? Because I did get some specific emails requesting that from members of the public already. That's why I asked the question.
Oh, no problem. Thank you again for giving me the time to present.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Flynn,
Mr. Walsh.
to you, I guess, can I make a request that,
Please.
to the extent that we're going to be getting handouts
Yes.
in the evening, to the extent that we can get them as soon as they possibly become available in the day so that we might all be able to review them before we come in here, I think it would be helpful as opposed to getting everything delivered here.
Absolutely.
So that would just be a request I would ask that you make to the departments that are possibly could be having documents that are presented on a nightly basis.
Sure. Mr. Tetreau, can we make that request to your department heads when they go forward, and they can feel free, however is easiest for them to get them to everybody around the table? And let's just make sure that Mrs. Bossi and I think Mr. Mayor is copied on those documents so they're aware as well, if we could do that.
As an example of something, if there's a, let's just take Public Works.
Right.
There's a Public Works document that gets generated tomorrow morning at 10:30 and it's available. I think it should be provided to us tomorrow, not the day of the day of the meeting. So that if I ask the department head when this document was prepared, and he says that we've had this for 3 days, we should not expect that to be the case.
Yeah, it is on. I think that the policy has been to certainly get them out as quick as we can, certainly get them back through the clerk so they get distributed to the board. That seems a very reasonable request, and I think we've tried to do that in the past. There are some challenges with follow-up information, I know, based on workloads, getting it
Sure.
done, and how timely that can get done. But certainly anything as part of the normal presentation that
I think we always say that's our goal. I think very rarely does it happen. I think there's things that get handed out by department heads when they come in, to the extent that they have them available and can get them to us beforehand, because quite frankly, we sometimes come across as rude because our head is buried in a document that we just got as opposed to paying attention to the presenter. So I know best efforts are made, but, you know.
With email, that shouldn't be a problem, and we'll make sure the department heads are clear.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Anyone else? Mr. DeWitt, please.
Just to clarify, on documents that on the website, 2 years ago, the Budget Committee made a recommendation that all documents that are handed to us, except for obviously documents in private executive session, be posted to the website.
Yep.
So.
And I just want to
you really-
reiterate
Yeah,
that.
I'm glad you did, but going forward for this meeting, or for the rest of this budget season, all documents are always to be put on the website.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Mr. Becker?
Thank you. Also, if we can just make sure when they're sending those emails out, that they still come to us in the hard copy. That would be one. I think that typically happens, but if they're sending them in advance, that we're still getting those, so we can work with them at the meeting. And the other thing would be all the documents, and I think Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey agrees on this one from the past. It's been brought up about always noting who has made, the actual documents. We can kind of cite back originally. So if you could just try to make sure through the process, all the departments have something like that on there. Obviously, we knew you were the one for this one, but if we could do that, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
I think my name's on the front.
There you go. All right, let's move on then, and we're going to go to our first department of the budget, or our first item of the budget, which is the active medical, which is included in the Human Resources Department, and that's section 1330 of our budget book. And I'm going to ask Mr. Mayor to lead us on this. I know we have some guests from Aon that are here. Always an entertaining discussion.
We try.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and Mr. Carlton Lindgren and Eric Fiedler, who's replaced Mr. Steve Ribeiro. And they have, and I actually realize, this is a document you just got tonight. Could have got it to you a couple hours earlier.
Page
but-
110. Thank you. It's page 110 in the budget book, health, self-insurance line items. And then this is the renewal projection document that was forwarded by email earlier today.
and
Welcome,
no,
gentlemen.
This was not forwarded by email.
Oh, there was another one that was forwarded by email.
The OPEB pension
thought this
plan,
was
which was,
included.
which was an update of the one that I forwarded last week.
Got it.
And then this covers both Board of Ed and town.
Thank you. We'll turn it over to you, gentlemen. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
You can't take him anywhere.
Okay.
You just,
You have a 6-page document in front of you. The first 3 pages make reference to the budgets for the current fiscal year and the 14-15 fiscal year for the town and the Board of Ed. So if you want to flip to the first page, let me see.
can you walk us through the, refamiliarize us with the document, please?
Sure. On the left-hand side of the document are the components that make up the individual components that make up the total cost. And you'll see they're listed 1 through 15. The first 3 columns are for the medical coverage. The next 3 columns are for the prescription drug. The next 3 are the dental, and the totals are on the right-hand side. They're split between active medical and retiree medical, and the totals are on the bottom right. So, do you want me to, this is the same format we've used over the last umpteen years, so do you want to go through the calculations or just get right to it?
Do any board members need a review of the calculations, or do you all remember them from prior years? I think we
Okay.
can go right ahead.
Okay, so if you look in the, on the bottom grayed-out section, you'll see line 16 is the current estimated cost for the 13-14 fiscal year. That's the year that we're currently in. All the way to the right-hand side into the total column, $15,831,000 are the expected costs for 13-14 on the town side. And that's using the latest 12 months of paid claims through January of 14 and projecting them all the way through July of 2014.
Okay, so, saying that, that's 9895 is the active cost, and that's comparative to the current year's budget, correct?
Of $10,447,000, the number right below it.
Right.
And same for the retirees, $5,936,000 compared to $6,148,000. So in total, $15,831,000 compared to the budget set at $16,595,000. We're $764,000 to the good.
Now, hang on that for a second. Mr. Mayor, how does that compare? I want to confirm for a second before we go forward, that what they're quoting as their budget per this document is what was in our current year budget book. I want to make sure, because I know you guys sometimes do a projection from last year.
Yeah, it's
and
actually,
compare.
actually line 17 says Aon budget projection.
Exactly,
So-
it doesn't say town.
Because I don't know what the budget number is.
And that's what I'm asking, because I
Sure.
want to make sure we're on the same page here, because in years past, this has gotten us into trouble.
I can answer that, that question very soon. A couple of comments, though, while Linda is, the actual total number is $10,427,000, so it's about $20,000 different for one reason or another. Also, the number that, when we get to the renewal projection, i.e. for the budget year that we are here to operate on, the budgeted number is in there as of the experience through December 31st.
Right.
This information is through January 31st, and both for the town and the Board of Ed. Actually, the Board of Ed was actually through October 31st. So these numbers are different than what's in your current budget books.
And we'd like to understand what those differences are and the impact on the budget.
Yes.
So, bottom line, we budgeted $10,427,000 last year. You were recommending $10,447,000, so we're within $20,000.
Yep.
I'm correct so far? Looking
Yes,
to
sir.
find it. Okay. And our experience now, best available information through January, says we're going to be at 9,895. So we're to the good by a couple $100,000,
Right.
$300,000.
Right. In
Right.
fact, your increases, I mean, I'm looking at this in total, not just the actives, but your increases through, with data through 10 of 13, through October of 13, it was plus 7.2.
Right.
Well, I mean,
So our trend's going
that's...
the wrong way
Yeah, no, your trends,
the last couple of months, right?
your claim experience has gone significantly better.
Oh, okay, so say it again. We were at what? Because I misunderstood what you said there.
I'll hold this till the next page, because it's more relevant on the next page.
Okay.
Sorry.
Does everybody understand where we are with this? Is there any follow-up questions?
One other comment is, there's the 10,447 or 10,427.
Right.
That's the gross number, and the net to the town would be that number minus the employee's co-premium.
Right, which are enumerated up above, right? in the
Yeah,
funding, I
that's
think.
insurance plan cost.
Right.
Gross plan cost.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions on this one document, on this page? Mr. Kiley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to go back to that last question about the current year activity, so you're saying that the town budget was the 10,427, 20,000 less than the Aon projection for the current year?
I'm trying to find it.
Mr. Mayor?
Bob?
No, it's fine. Going back to the town budget versus the Aon budget, the Aon budget was 10,447, the town was 10,427, is that what I heard?
Yes,
So there's a difference of $20,000,
correct.
meaning we're to the good 532 versus 552, is that correct?
Adjusted for the net, because, again, as we talked about just a moment
Right.
ago, what's in the budget that's paid for by the taxpayers is the 10,447 minus employee coinsurance.
Understood, but I was just trying to relate that difference in the budget to that one column of the active. There's a $20,000 variance, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us the same information for
Right.
the retiree column? What the difference was between the town budgeted number for the retirees versus the Aon budgeted?
That's part of the OPEB conversation.
Okay, so we should hold on that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, Mr. Brockville.
Just, good evening, thanks for
Good
coming
evening.
back again.
Thanks.
Just one quick question for you is that, how confident are you, we're sitting now, what is it, March 4th or whatever, and you are making these projections based on information through the end of January, right?
Right.
And you said that, we were doing worse, and then now we've had a string of good months. I'm interpreting what you said, and we're to the better. So how confident do you feel that that can be extended out, extrapolated to the end of June with, so this number?
Extrapolating means it's going to continue to go down?
Well, no, just you're estimating it'll end up being at 9,900,000, right?
Yeah.
I assume that's based on what's going on. You're making some guesses from now till the end of the year, right?
Right. Of course, it's difficult because, as I mentioned, or started to mention at least, we started out with a renewal, not an update of the current year, but the renewal started at 7.2% through data through October, and is now down to 3.8 3 months later.
Renewal meaning, I know we're jumping ahead here. Renewal meaning what?
The percentage increase
Right.
for 14-15 started at 7.2
Right.
and is now down to 3.8
Gotcha.
3 months later. So how confident am I?
Yeah, this is something that we spent considerable time on last year, I'm sure you remember. And there's only one answer. For the budget purpose, we use the latest and best available information. And it's all subject, this type, this is obviously one of those things that's totally and absolutely subject to change.
Right. That's what I was trying to get at. Okay.
Which is why it's so important that we're not so tight on our reserves in this area, because you could easily blow the budget in 1 year and dip too far into the reserve and have a problem with the credit rating agencies due to the internal service fund.
Yes.
Mr. DeWitt?
So, I'm looking at this year's budget book, excuse me, and it has Aon's projection for last year, and for some reason, it's a $17 million number. Did we take Aon's full recommendation last year? Because I know, again, long debate last year, smoothing the worst 5 years of our life kind of numbers, right? And I know there was some discussions, maybe just internal, that we didn't necessarily have to take that full number.
Was the 17 in total?
17,369,408.
That's active and retiree?
That's the whole, it's
Yes.
that sheet,
Yeah,
the sheet you're showing us from last year, right?
Yep.
But yet, we keep coming back to a 10,440
Yeah,
number, right?
Yeah,
So did that mean we
for the
didn't take Aon's?
purposes of this conversation, look at the third column from the left.
1, 2, 3.
Just the active.
11,033.
Right.
Okay. I'm looking at, my question is just this. Did
I
we
know it
take
doesn't-
Aon's full recommendation last year at face value, or did we not?
We were off $20,000, as we mentioned earlier.
On the full number, or just that, or just the one number where, you seem to be talking about active, the retirees?
Right, that's what we're talking about, is we're talking about the town budget, general fund, active employees, healthcare insurance number.
11,033. Is the number that's in the budget book. The budget book, the supporting documentation in the back of the budget book, I should say. I just, again, the only reason for my question was I know we talked about the recommendation and that it's, I use the word volatile, it's
Yeah,
an educated guess at what the projection is. And I know there was some discussion about last year, was it too conservative? I just don't remember if we took the total recommendation
The
from
total
Aon last year.
recommendation, if you look at the 11,000,033
Yes,
number,
yep,
that number was cut by 400,000 by the Board of Selectmen vote, and accepted by the Board of Finance and the RTM.
what about the
With that.
retiree side?
Retiree side, well, that's part of OPEB. This is not retiree side. Right now, we're talking about, but
Okay,
to
got
answer
it.
your
So the
question.
answer to the
But
question-
to answer your question, I mean, I don't want to ignore your question, because it's a real
Oh,
simple answer.
Yeah,
and since it's come up 3 times here, the OPEB is defined by what's called the ARC. And the actuaries give us a number, and that number has been fully budgeted on the
But
town,
answer my
on the town
You answered my
side.
real question, which was, did we accept the full Aon recommendation last year? And the answer is no.
Time out.
In the total,
Time out, though. What happened, in all fairness, is that Aon redid their projections as we got closer to voting on the budget. And their final projection is actually what's reflected here in number 17. If you look at the footnote, it says, based on best and final Anthem RFP offer, reflects the change. It also reflects the fact that we were rebidding some insurance, at least on one side of the house, right? We ended up doing it, I guess, across the entire thing. So when we say we're,
Yep.
and I'm just going to stick to the medical side now, I'm not going to stick to the OPEB
no,
side.
I'm with you, yep.
We're within $20,000 of what they're saying was their best and final.
Oh, get it, the best and final. That's where I got stuck, because the
Right.
date in here is not the best and final.
The date that you have in last year's book.
Right.
Is not the best and final because there were additional adjustments made, including rebidding, as I recall, the insurance.
Yeah, I believe that
Oh, I
that
remember
number
that
was
now.
reduced by a reduction in administrative costs and stop-loss costs.
Exactly.
The claims were the claims because you didn't switch vendors, but they did bring the other costs down.
Thank you, exactly.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So, does that help?
Yes.
That's what I was looking
Are you all set, Chris? I want to go back. I'm afraid I might have cut off Mr. Kiley, did I?
No, I'm good. Thank you, sir.
Mrs. Albin?
I just have a procedural question. As we go through this work and as individuals, we're sitting here looking at something, could we reference what page we're on so that people around the table can stay with that line of questioning and conversation?
Thank you. Yes. Good suggestion. Any other questions? We're still on page 1. Mr. Walsh?
Last year, we put our health plan out to bid, correct?
Correct.
And we had major savings, correct?
The Board of Ed did.
The Board of Ed did. The town did not?
The town saved, by virtue of the fact that Anthem, your medical vendor, had to rebid everything, administrative expenses and stop-loss charges across the board. You did benefit even from the board moving to Cigna. You guys benefited on the fixed administrative side, yes. So, yeah.
How often in your business do towns like ours go out to bid?
3 to 5 years.
And is there a reason for that?
Yeah, I mean,
I would say, even, private sector companies will do it every 3 to 5 years just for due diligence. You also know that the market changes, discounts change, vendors will get more aggressive. So it's just good to check every 3 to 5 years to see what's going on in the marketplace. And now we're in such a industry of vast change, moving very quickly, that you're going to see different changes in provider payment systems, the way they pay providers, and how providers are going to take risks. So it is beneficial for any town, any company to bid every 3 or 5 years. And even if you don't switch vendors, as you saw with the town last year, it keeps them honest, and you have more negotiation and leveraging power to reduce your administrative fees and stop loss and things like that.
Because even our current carrier last year came back with an immediate cost savings, correct?
Correct.
And I don't know your business, and that's why we hire you guys, but why wouldn't you go out every other year or something else like that?
Generally,
You get penalized for doing this at all?
we generally get a multi-year guarantee on the fees.
Okay.
So it doesn't behoove you to go out when you're going to get the same fee as part of the guarantee.
So you lock in some of those costs?
I'm sorry?
You lock in some of those
Yeah,
costs as part
we
of the
lock in
deal?
as many as we can, yeah.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah, we do it on the prescription side as well. It's generally a 3-year contract with discounts are guaranteed for the 3-year period.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our presenters. I'm just wondering if we could have a reminder, since we do have a new presenter, and I think some of us missed your name in the beginning, and that's one question. The second is, do we have copies of this document for the public?
For the
For the
public?
public. So
I
could
handed
you-
over 15, I handed over 15 copies today, so I didn't make any for the public. I don't know if,
that one's a- Do we have any copies of this
No, there
document?
were 15 that have been distributed. I don't know who has them. There's this table, and that's all we have.
Okay, so this will go up on the website
Yes.
as well, but just, again, maybe as an
Last year,
administrative note.
everything went up on the website, and this year, everything will go up on the website.
Great. Just, it would be helpful to have copies available for the public, and if you could do that. But if you could also reintroduce yourself, thank you.
Okay. Yep, I'm Eric Fiedler. I'm a vice president with Aon Hewitt Consulting and a client lead. So in addition to the town of Fairfield, I also have 4 or 5 other clients that I manage their healthcare benefits in terms of overall strategy.
and I'm Carlton Lindgren, Vice President at Aon as well, and I'm a financial manager, so I do all your projections, town and board.
Anyone else? Any other questions on page 1? Mr. Becker?
More general, but as we're going through, kind of with the questions that came up about some of the adjustments, if we could maybe get a copy of the budget control and budget adjustment spreadsheets for fiscal 13-14 emailed out through the RTM adjustments. I think they're posted on the town website only through BOF, but that I think might be helpful as context when we try to figure out where some of the funds were taken down versus some of these books.
Mrs. Gardner, can you just take a look at where the vote adjustments were done between the presented, you have the control sheets, what was presented and then what the final
Do you want
was.
13, or did you mean 14?
No, I mean, yeah,
13 to
fiscal
14.
year
Okay.
14,
Current
13,
year.
14, yeah, last year's.
Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Walsh?
Last year, you pointed out there were some new fees last year that were unfamiliar with, and when pressed, Carl, I think it was you, who stated that those were some of the Obamacare fees and taxes.
Yep.
That new legislation was forcing onto all employers, including municipalities.
Correct.
Where is that number here?
Numbers 13 and 14.
13 and 14.
ACA stands for the Affordable Care Act. It's really PPACA, but the PCORI fee, which is, it's a research fee, actually, on how to best deliver health care, and that charges $1 per member per year. And the transitional reinsurance fee is, given the advent of healthcare exchanges, the government understands, to their credit, that they're going to be taking on a lot of bad risk. And to fund some of those large claimants that they expect in the healthcare exchanges, they're collecting $63 per member per year from basically everybody.
Okay, so the total fees, if you go to the far right column, I guess would be $67,000 worth of fees for that, for both of those? Am I looking at
well,
that correctly,
that-
for including retirees,
For the current fiscal year.
current fiscal year?
Right, and that's because the transitional reinsurance fee was effective January of 14, so it was right in the middle of the year. You'll see a much heftier fee when you turn the next page.
Of what we're going to be paying this year?
That's-
what we're
'cause
expected to
that's-
pay in
that's a
budget
half
for?
a year. That's a half a year's worth of fees.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All set? Let's go to page 2.
Two.
Page 2.
Okay, so page 2 is the projection for the fiscal year of 14-15, and it basically uses the exact same experience period, that is, information through January of 2014, but it gets trended over a much longer period, in this case, 17 months, because you have to project those claims out to January of 14 through January of 15. So if you look down on the bottom right-hand side again, we're projecting a number of, well, let's just use the actives. We're projecting $10,786,39. The budget, as we've already discussed, $10,447,000 or $427,000 or whatever the number is a 3.2% increase on
Now-
just the actives.
Let's stop right there. Let's just stay with the actives since that's this budget line.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, how do we tie that number, how does that tie to the budget book? I know it doesn't tie exactly because you have the employees paying part of the premiums, but how do we get from 10,780,639 to 9,357,566, which is what's in the budget book for via the first selectman. I am. It's funny how I did that.
Sorry. No,
The budget
the
that's in front of us.
original quote, or I don't want to say quote, that's the wrong term, excuse me. The original estimate for the 2015 fiscal year was approximately $218,000 more than the $10,780,000 you're seeing now.
Okay.
I think that number was about $10,989,000.
It's on page 325 in the budget book.
That might be the easiest way to answer this.
Excuse me, $10,899,000 was the original number, so it's like $199,000 less. Then that number is then divided between WPCA and the town.
Yep.
And then it's further reduced by employee co-share to get to the total number that would be in the budget book.
So where is that reconciliation? I was looking for
What
that.
page is that on the budget book?
Yeah.
If you go to 324, which is the page right before the other one.
Page 324, right above.
324. That's what I want to get to.
I will go there as well.
But these are not the numbers given tonight.
The ones that you were looking at originally was just the general fund piece. There's a WPCA piece too. So when you were talking about the HR section where it was funded, that's only a significant portion of it, but we were missing the WPCA piece. So you really should be looking at these pages.
Right. Say it again, Caitlin, we really quote-unquote...
Well, you were looking at the HR piece, which was
Yep.
just the general fund piece. So you'd have to go to the WPCA page also to add in their health insurance
Right,
piece
that's
of
what I'm-
that to get there. So if you look at these
This
two
is
pages,
actually,
it's better.
this is actually both.
Right, here it is.
Yeah, here,
Originally.
right.
My statement is, the Aon sheet in here is different than the Aon sheet we got tonight, just.
Yes, it's a month more information.
More data, no, right.
Hey,
Right.
guys? Okay. How do I get from 9357 to the Aon sheet that's page 325, which shows the 10899?
What's your 9.3, what,
The budget.
9357,566 is health insurance expense for the town.
Page 110.
First selectman recommendation for 2015.
That does not include the WPCA piece.
I understand. What I
That will
wa-
get you there.
Right, so where, help me get there.
Gotcha. I'll tell you what page.
I want to tie it to that, and if what I'm hearing's correct, we've got a potential pickup here based on the existing, on the revised numbers.
Tom, page 313.
yeah, we have about $120,000 pickup, plus or minus.
Right.
Tom, page 313 is the other piece of that health insurance.
Okay.
On line 52100, on page 313.
I'm sorry, Linda, say the
Okay,
number.
go to page 313.
Yep,
And you're going to look at line 52100.
so 433,
Right, so you add that 433,077.
9357 plus 433, okay?
We'll get you to the 9,970,000 on page 324.
Well, it doesn't because where is the employee kick-in piece?
That's reconciled on page 324 as well.
Right, so I got to go back to 324. I'm sorry, guys, I want to make sure we're all talking apples and apples.
It goes like this. You start with page 324. The Aon renewal information, given the numbers through December 31, was $10,899,673. Okay? That number is then reduced by the employee contribution amount, which is $1,143,801, which gives you a net. Then there's two people, or there's, then there's new positions but then you get a net of 9,790, which is made up by $9,357,000 to the town budget and $433,000 in the WPCA budget. The gross has been reduced by the information through January by about $200,000. When you carry that $200,000, when you divide it and carry it through, there will probably be $130,000. That's something we started on today but didn't finish. Will be like about $130,000 net reduction to the general fund.
That one thing doesn't make sense to me.
What one thing?
So if you take and say that it's 10,899, right?
Now it's 10, so it's $200,000 less.
Right. Why would we only get 130 of that, not a much higher percentage, given our percentage kick-in as compared to the
But
employees?
it also, because the total savings to the town isn't $200,000, it's $200,000 minus 10%, or 12%, whatever, 15%, which is the about 12%, which is the 11%, which is employee contribution.
No,
So you
I
got
understand that.
200,000, so now you're down to 180,000.
That's the number I would
And then
look
you
for.
take a piece of that and give it to WPCA, and you're down to a number.
So you're saying the 120 is just the town
Yeah, that's
piece?
probably, I just did that quickly in my head, it might be 150,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on how this reconciles to the budget book? Did you guys follow it?
Did you get to the number you wanted to get to?
I did.
So,
So the Reader's Digest version, you take the 110, okay? You go to page 110, you take the 9357.
yep.
You go to WPCA, you take the health insurance, you add 433, that comes out to 9,790,000. You go to page 325, right, 324, you can tick the 9,790 as the net town cost.
Yeah.
You add the employee contribution, 1,145, right, gets you to a 10,935. The 10,935 compares to page 325, the 10,899. The differential being the fact that you added in employees, so they added in an estimated cost for that, because they're not including in their projection because they're new employees. So that's why instead of hitting 10,899, they hit 10,935. See? Now that 10,935, okay, or really look at the 10,988, compare that to the 10,780, which is the new projection here based on updated information, because this was through December, this is through January. You had a $200,000 pickup, of which the town's share is somewhere between 150 and 120,000.
So I'm with you. What I don't understand is there's a departmental number of 10,006,410, and then a first selectman. So there's a reduction. It appears as if the first selectman has reduced that number. I mean, that's usually the department number is the number the departments submit, then the first selectman has a cut at it. So it looks like the first selectman took it from 10,006 to 9,357.
Yes.
That's what I don't understand. Where did that 10,006, I'm with you with the math, but how did we get to that 10,006, the department number? Because that shouldn't change, right? That's obviously it's a mathematical, the number we get from you guys, right?
I'm sorry, I was drafting something to put in next year's budget book, so we didn't have to go through this conversation next year, so it'll be really clear. But I didn't quite understand the
Why is there a
question.
department
Oh.
number and a first selectman number, and why are they different in that line?
Well, that would be different because of the request for new positions that were eliminated.
Oh, so department heads requested heads that were rejected, and then that
Yes.
number, okay, that's fair, got it.
All set?
Yep.
Great. Any other questions on this page? Mr. Kiley?
Follow up to Mr. DeWitt's question. Chris, were you asking about the $700,000 variance between the FY department, the FY15 department request and the first selectman's request?
Yeah.
I would direct that question to the first selectman, because it is about $700,000. Is that based on, without leading the witness, of course, is that based on information that was new to you that wasn't available when the budget book was printed? And whether it is or whether it is not, is that $700,000 part of the $3.8 million the department request that you reduced on slide 11 in your presentation?
It's our finance department, Ms. Gardner, that do the adjustments based on headcount. So if a position's added, they adjust the 4 or 5 lines that is relevant to. If a position's eliminated, the finance department also adjusts the 4 or 5 lines that's relevant to make sure that we all stay on the same page. So
Yeah, the other, there's
I'm going to
actually...
turn that
there's-
question back to Mr. Mayor or Ms. Gardner to step you through the adjustment.
Yeah, there's actually 2 pieces to that $700,000 number.
Okay, thank you.
One piece is the, 8 or 9 positions, and the second piece was the original numbers were based upon a higher estimate. It's so basically we have 3 sets of numbers so far.
Okay.
We have the numbers that we originated in the Department of Finance as a working model. Then we have the numbers through December, and then we have the numbers through January. The $700,000 difference is a combination of the positions that were the savings from the positions cut by the first selectman, plus the difference between the original, i.e. the first number, and the second number, which was used through December 31.
Okay. Thank you for that. And so for the second part of the question, Mr. Tetreau, is that 700,000 part of the 3.8 in the presentation?
Again, Linda, is that, I assume that's the included part in the 3.8?
Yeah.
So your answer is yes.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Kiley, any other questions?
Good.
Mr. Becker?
On that difference, is it possible to get a worksheet just breaking those numbers out for us? No rush, but
Yep.
kind of
Okay.
general. I mean, is there a way to, a little
Yeah.
more detail? Yeah, that, on the cut sheet, perfect, thank you.
We'll go back to our presenters. Go right ahead.
Any other questions on that page?
So basically, our trend right now is going in a positive direction, which, in the budget book right now, which was based on the December trend, right?
Right.
Was a little bit higher. Our trend through January has been better.
Yep. Your emerging claim experience has been better.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's-
Fancy words, emerging claim experience,
Right.
our trend. I like that.
Right.
And
Because, to further complicate things, of course,
Right.
the next projection I do with info through February will have a different annual trend rate
Yes.
applied, because our firm does a trend survey, and we release findings every 6 months. I got it yesterday. Medical trend is coming down, so I will lower the annual trend rate in the next projection. Instead of 9, I think it's going to be 8.3.
And so depending on what our individual claims experience has been, plus that, these numbers could look even better in another month.
They could.
Right. I know you're not guaranteeing. I get it.
I'm definitely not guaranteeing.
What date are you going to release that information to Mr. Mayor?
I should get February's claims by the middle of March, sometime between the 15th and the 18th, and then I need a couple of days.
Okay, and then
So-
we can get that for us well in time before we vote. Not that we'll change anything, but just it'll better inform our decision at that time, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the town side medical? We'll go to Mr. Kiley.
Just that. Fortunately, without jinxing ourselves, it seems like this is at least the second year where we've had new information, January, February, into March, that has benefited us on what we ultimately needed to budget for. I can speak for this year so far based on what you just said versus what we're reading versus December, which is good news, and the same thing happened last year. I can't think back beyond that, but it seems to me that it's happened a few years to us in general. So my question is there any normal seasonality that would indicate that we are entering into or coming through a part of a typical year that typically or generally shows lessening of charges coming up for the next 3 to 4, 6 months? Or is there no correlation there whatsoever that you could possibly count on or think about looking forward?
Good question. No. No. If you
That
were
sums it up. Thank you.
Yeah.
No.
If you were the Board of Education, I would say yes, because there is a seasonality
There's
involved. with
reasons for it, possibly.
Teachers off in the summer, and you definitely see a seasonal kind of spike on the board side that you don't see on the town side.
Yes, but those are taken into consideration in the evaluation.
Right.
Right, yeah, I mean, yeah, there is seasonality. That, the direct answer to your question, Mr. Kite, is yes, there is seasonality. But that seasonality is interpreted and taken into the calculation, the evaluation
Right.
that Mr. Carlton does. And you'll see that doesn't, as soon as we flip the page, you'll see it doesn't always go positive.
Right. But at this, I guess my question is, without getting in the weeds, it's not just dumb luck, or could it be just luck, that at this time, 7, 8 months into a year, when you're revisiting, when you are revisiting the look at, January, February, March, that this is the typical time where the look appears to be a bit more positive than it may have looked 3 or 4 or 6 months back?
Yeah, that's dumb luck.
Okay.
That's not happening because of any known seasonality amongst, look, I can't tell you, I expect your claims to be higher or lower over the next 3 months coming up
Okay.
because of some kind of seasonal trend. To Bob's point, because we always use 12 months of claim experience,
Yeah.
you catch that seasonality, and every time you update, you still have 12 months.
Okay, okay,
So,
thanks.
Sure.
Appreciate that.
You need something? All right, why don't we, because I know we're going to have a discussion on the Board of Ed side as well, right? Would everyone like to get through OPEB first and then come back and look at the Board of Ed? Because I think that's a more challenging discussion, right? Mr. Mayor, I'm looking at you.
So you want to go to Mr. Ryer and do pension and OPEB, or just go Mr. Ryer and do
Which is- I
OPEB?
didn't
Or,
know
I mean,
whether you
Mr.
wanted-
Ryer is doing OPEB and pension
Okay,
for,
so let's stay on this
So
and
we
go
should
through
stay
the
on-
Board of
yes.
Ed one. Let's stay on this and go through the Board of Ed one, and then we'll go back. Take us through the Board of Ed if you don't mind.
Okay, I did include show you how we calculate trend. I don't
Yeah.
think, we don't have to go through that.
Does anybody have any questions on page 3?
It's really informational.
How about page 2? Do you have more on page 2?
I didn't think we talked about page 2.
We were just on page 2. That's what we just reconciled.
My question, this is the question I have every year. Why do we compare the budget for this year's number to your calculated number rather than the number your projection for the end of the year? So why are we comparing 10,780 to 10,447, which we really should be comparing 10,780 to 9,895, which is what you really think it's going to be for this year? You know what I'm saying?
No.
You're saying
No, I don't.
third column from the left,
Yep.
you're saying this is a 3% increase over last year.
Right. I'm saying the costs are going to be $10,780,000.
Right. But you also are comparing it to 10,447, which is not your most current number because you've generated a number on the first page that said, I told you 10,447 last year. Now I think it's to be 9,895.
Right. You're asking to see the projection over actual versus the projection over budget.
I think that, right.
That is what you're asking.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Because that's almost a 9% increase.
Right, because it's going to be a 9% every single time. Because the annual trend is 9%. So if you use the 12-month prior claim experience, and those are the actuals, and you trend it forward, the difference is going to be trend. Every single time,
It's always going to be 9%.
always, mathematically.
well, it's always going to be the trend.
It's always going to
Right,
be
no,
trend.
it's always
Whatever
gonna be the trend.
Whatever annual trend is, that's what it's going to be.
Oh, okay. It's just, it looks fictitious
Typically,
in how much the increase is, but,
typically, people like to know what their increase is over what they budgeted in the prior year. I mean, your budgeted number is what you have in the bank, if you will. Generally,
Well, your
clients
budget
like to
number-
see.
Your budget number is what you expense.
Is what
And
you
whatever the difference is between the budgeted number and the actual number for that year comes out of the reserve that you should have on the books.
Yeah, if it's a negative, if
Right.
it's the other way
Or
around.
it adds to the
Or you
reserve.
add to the.
Exactly.
to your
The
surplus.
net goes either for or against the reserve.
Right.
So the budget, in fact, becomes the town's actual expense for the year.
Right.
With the reserve being the catch-all. Okay. Does anybody, are you good, Mr. Dwight? Okay, do we want to go, we're on page 3. Does anybody have any questions on page 3? Seeing none, we'll go to page 4, which is the Board of Ed. My apologies, I thought we could do OPEB first, but since it's different presenters, let's go with this. Okay, Mr. Wallace points out something good. Page 4, they actually renumbered page 1 because they switched to the Board of Education.
Correct.
Okay, different
They are
color
from
scheme.
two different documents, actually.
Okay.
Okay, so on the Board of Ed, page 1 again. And this is exactly the same formula as on the town side. So I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. The updated fiscal year's cost of $26,791,000 compared to the budget number of $26,527 is a 1% behind the 8 ball, if you will, in the current year. Okay, so it's 200, is that me?
I think so.
To you, Mr. Mayor? Okay.
Can you maybe switch mics with Eric? What are you talking about?
So it's about $264,000 higher than what we would expect for fiscal 13-14.
Okay, now, here's where it's going to get confusing, though, right? Because those numbers that you're referring to are based on the best available projection that you gave last year. That's what you're calling the budget.
The 26,527 is the number that we provided for 13-14 at the time.
Right. But what do we have in the budget for last year for the Board of Ed side?
The Board of Ed final budget for all the activity which flows through Aon was budgeted at $26,527,285.
No, I thought we had a different, it's not. We had a different number in there because they were going to use some of their reserve, I thought.
Well, okay, that, yes and no, but what they budgeted, what's in their calculation is that number. Then how they were going to fund that number is where you're going.
Okay.
Right.
What's in
So-
the budget?
Right, so what they were anticipating using approximately 2528 minus 1891. Somebody have a calculator? 2528 minus 1891. So they anticipated in the budget using $637,000 of the reserve.
Okay, and what did the reserve start at?
$2,528,000.
So the reserve was going to be,
$1,891,000.
and now, because of the trend not being our friend in this instance, right,
Right, I think
we're going to lose an extra $264,000.
$264,000.
Which brings us down to 1,635,000, if everything works out.
Yeah, I have 1,631,000, I don't know why, but maybe I
Right.
just was rounding or using different numbers, but yes.
So it'll be at
we're in-
1,635,000 in the reserve, all things being equal, as of July 1st this year.
Correct. And the anticipated reserve at the end, the acquired reserve, is 1,428,000.
So we're just about there.
So we would still have an excess reserve of about $200,000.
Now, question, when you say required reserve, that's the one-time IBNR, is that what it is?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's carry that forward. I'm sorry, do people mind if I? Okay, page 2 here is going through next year, right?
Yes, sir.
So this has it going to 28,542.
Correct.
Best available information through January, right?
Yes.
What's in the Board of Ed budget book for funding purposes this year, the proposed
Well,
budget?
let's approach it the same way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, what's in the budget book is that 28,542,000 number is in the budget book is 27,636.
27,636. So
Difference of $906,000, I believe.
906,000. So, all things being equal, we would take a reserve starting at July 31st this year. We subtract out 906, and we would be at $740,000 reserve at the end of fiscal year 2015, which would be roughly half the required IBNR, the required reserve.
No,
That was supposed to be a negative.
Yeah, that's the way the math works.
we start out with 161,
Subtract out 900.
subtract out 900,
You're at 700,000.
you're at 700,000.
Let's say the IBNR stays at 1.4, which was the number you
The
gave.
IBNR would go up to about 1.6.
Fine. So I'll use your number.
And then you'd also have approximately a $200,000 increase in income from employee.
Okay, so we're
Right.
back. So it goes from 1.6 back to 1.4, we're at 700,000 in the hole.
Yes.
So that's not good news. And you said the trend's getting worse in this area.
The emerging claim experience has gotten worse, yes.
That's right. You keep correcting me on that. Thank you.
The good news is actually we are realizing pretty much the savings that we anticipated.
Great.
Just for historical purposes, the number that we came up with for the Board of Ed for 13-14 as a result of the RFP is almost exactly the number that we're projecting for 13-14 here.
So what does that mean? You're
So that meant the $1 million savings that we had projected because of the marketing effort
right.
actually is coming to fruition.
So basically, if I can paraphrase what you're saying, is our downside here that's hitting us and our increase in expenses that's projected next year is based on claims experience, not based on the associated fees with administering the contract. So basically, you're saying, hey, all the work we did last year saved us $1 million, and we realized that save, and thank God we did, because if we didn't, we would already use up the IBNR.
Well said.
Yeah.
But the numbers that you laid out are the numbers you laid out.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is
I mean,
going in the wrong
you'd
direction.
be in a plus position versus what we said had you not had this this kind of spike in large claimants over the past few months.
Yeah, no, I got it. Does everybody else?
Yeah.
So this is not good news.
Understated.
Any other questions or comments on this? Now, let me ask the Board of Ed, since you guys were kind enough to stay. When you approved the budget a month ago, or in late January, that was based off the December number, right? October number. What was, thank you for that correction, what was the intent of the Board of Education relative to funding the annual expense that was calculated with Aon? In other words, last year, there was a conscious decision made to use some of the reserve funds, right? Because you had 2 times the IBNR. When the discussion was had regarding next year, when you guys approved the budget, what was the intent relative to that reserve fund? Please, feel free, Mr. Dwyer. Thank you for staying.
No. The intent this year, as well as in prior years, is to take the calculations that Aon provided us and adopt a budget that, on a projection basis, at the time we adopted the budget, would get us to the 1 times IBNR. We can have a month or 2 with good experience, and we can have a month or 2 of bad experience, but we essentially adopt the budget based on the most recent information that they gave us, which I think was either the October report that we got in November and then bake into the budget. We have not, in the past, taken 1 month good news or 1 month bad news to change that original projection. We've adopted budgets based on the projection. The projection came as a result of what would have been received sometime in mid-November and baked into the December budget.
We have actually done changes to the budget in past
The Board of
years.
Finance has, yes.
Yeah.
The Board of Education has...
You guys did it once after the year was closed. You did it after the budget cycle. You might not have been on the board at that time, but it was done once after the budget cycle closed.
But if you ask what our intent was, is to take
That's
a
all I'm
point in
asking.
time, take that report, and then adopt a budget according to that, and leave updates to that line item based on new information that may come before the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance,
Right.
or even up through last year, up through the RTM.
Right. So in essence, what I'm hearing is, if this information had been before you guys, knowing that the IBNR, and I know we're using a rough number here, would have been 1.4, 1.5 million, and the intent was to not go below 1 times IBNR, you would have been at, your goal would have been to be at that 1.4 or 1.5 million balance as of June 30th, 2015.
Yes, our goal is to budget so that we are at the projected 1 times IBNR, and that's our goal.
And their claims experience has been so bad in the last 4 months that it shows with the trend that it's draining it an additional $700,000 more than they thought when they budgeted.
That's information that just came out recently. I've not seen his calculations.
I'm asking
Yeah.
our council, I'm asking counselors, not counselors, I just gave you a look, sorry about that. I'm asking our vice presidents from Aon.
Right.
Is that true? Is that a true statement, that that's what's happened?
That is a true statement.
Mr. Chairman, that's only in 3 months. Was the November date?
It's
The
October,
November data
right?
was for October, so November, December, January. You don't
Yeah.
have the February data yet.
Right.
It's only 3 months, that's $700,000.
Right.
So, God forbid, we have another couple months left in this year.
I mean, the increase in October was 4.2%, and the increase through the end of January is 7.6.
So almost the inverse of what happened on the town side.
Exactly.
It's the exact opposite.
One further piece of information, and that is exactly what the intent of the budget was, to have a 0 excess or deficit balance. Just pointing out that, as some of us remember, that at the end of 10, there was actually an excess reserve of $3 million, which is over time been used.
On the
in
Board of
that-
Ed side.
On Board of Ed side.
Yes.
And there was an offsetting deficit on the town side that we've actually corrected.
Right,
Right. With the whole goal being the internal service fund as a whole,
correct.
we're protecting due to a negative comment that was made in some bond rating agency reports.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Am I back to my
Mr.
back
Dwyer,
row seat?
you're happy to stay, or you can go back, whatever you
No,
think.
well, if somebody has a question, I'll come forward again, or
Thank
Dr.
you very
Title
much.
will.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, I'll go to the public on any comments or questions on the medical insurance for the town side or the Board of Ed. Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a 5-minute break, and then we can bring up our speakers on OPEB and pension. Gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you.
Dr. Title, is there anybody that might be able to make some copies for the public of this? Do you have anybody that?
I have 6 in the back.
You have 6 in the back?
I left them on the back table there.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay. Oh, I think we're good. Yeah.
Right, that's right, everybody's listening at home.
I made 2 copies. I don't know if it's enough
Thank you,
to
Dr. Title.
cover the entire public, but
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
for those having trouble sleeping or
Ouch. All right, we're back in session now, and we're here to cover 2 items. The last 2 items of the night. OPEB is 1310, and I believe that's page 331 in our budget book. And then pension as well. And I'm not exactly sure the page on that, but we'll find it. And we do have the presentation, the actuarial report, so we'll turn it over to yourself and Mr. Mayor. Welcome.
We're going to go out of order from the presentation material and start with OPEB, since that's kind of like, unless you want to go with,
Yeah, that's actually in our synopsis, that's where we're supposed to go, so.
yeah.
and I apologize, I didn't
No problem.
put the OPEB on the back of the pension presentation. So if you turn to page 21, and this isn't a full presentation because you do OPEB valuations every other year on the even year, so we're not presenting a new valuation. The last published valuation was the July 1st, 2012 valuation, which was previously presented, and that's at
Excuse me? I
Yes.
apologize. Could you introduce yourself?
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I'm Tim Ryer from Hooker and Helcom, Senior Vice President, Head of the Actuarial Practice. Thank you.
That was my fault, my apology.
We'll let it go once.
Okay. It's early.
Apologize.
Well, it's early in the budget process. Go.
Okay, and actually, slide 22 does show you, gives you a recap of that valuation, because as far as budget purposes go, that 2012 valuation set 2 ARCs, or OPEB ARCs, for the 2013-14 year, the year we're in the middle of, and then the budget cycle you're planning for right now, for 2014-15. And you see that again, on page 22. Next valuation will be for 14. We will, when we come back to present on the 14 valuation, we'll have some recommendations on reviewing the amortization policy related to that OPEB plan. Thought it was important to point out, because when you turn to the next page and you see, you know, especially when you compare it to your pension plan, the funding percentage does look quite low, but...
No, next page.
I'm talking about page 22.
You are, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
because I was already there. Okay,
Yeah,
'cause you
no,
were
sorry, I
referring to it.
apologize. I'm back on page 21. Just on the final two bullet points, talking about your funded percentage around, you know, the Board of Ed does not fund the OPEB, so the assets are all related to the town side. So when you just look at that, you're about 9.3% funded. But it's important to put it in perspective that only about a third of the municipalities across the state are doing anything with regard to funding. So the fact that you have a trust and you are funding 100% of the OPEB ARC, which if you do turn to page 22, so the number, as I understand it, that you would have in your budget is the bottom line. You see it split out between police and fire and other town, so it totals the 9.383, because that you pay the whole ARC, but then you net out the benefit payments. So the benefit payments and claims and other expenses related to retirees are then netted out. So to the extent there is positive or negative experience related to that, for example, if we were estimating OPEB claims and expenses were going to be $6 million, and you're going to put in the full 9.33, if it turns out they're $5 million or $7 million, that's more or less that would go into the OPEB trust. So it doesn't actually affect your budget, because the budget number is the 9.33. That's what you will fund. And then again, any positive claim experience benefits the OPEB trust. Negative claims experience would deplete the OPEB trust, as would be appropriate.
Okay, for a second, Mr. Mayor, just like before, where do we find these numbers in the budget book? Some of us just got the budget book in the last couple days.
Pages 330 and 331?
Okay, so I get that, and these are the actual budget pages. It's under an OPEB department on page 330, that's what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
I'm saying if you go to
Well,
page 304.
And, yes, you know, I'm
Right.
looking for that page, is that? Right.
Yep, there it is. That's what I was looking for, thank you.
And again, the WPCA piece is on page 313.
Great, thank you.
Page 313?
Yeah. Under the 52105 object.
Yep, got it.
Yep.
347, 938. Ties up.
Yeah, that's, if you look at page 330, which I haven't got to yet, because I'm moving all over the place.
Yeah.
You basically, it has the town general fund piece, it has the town WPCA piece, it has the town fire and police piece.
Okay, has everyone been able to reference the documents and see where the 9,383,000 for the total of the town is and where that's broken out between 304 and 313? Pages 304 and 313? It's three numbers. Yep. Got it? Okay. What about on the Board of Ed side? Is this the number that's in that budget as well? The 1,634,000? Or we don't fund that, but what do we do with it?
We do not fund that.
Right, but what do we have in there for when they get paid? Like, what do we budget for that?
That's, when we're going over the Aon numbers.
Yep,
On the
that's
town
part of that.
side, we were focused only on the active. On the Board of Ed side, we focus on active plus retirees.
That's what I thought, thank you. Does everybody understand that? So we don't have a trust fund set up, so we don't have a separate numbers here. It's part of that overall medical cost on that side.
Right, and if I remember correctly, and Mr. Ryer, because we don't fund the Board of Ed, the discount rate for the Board of Ed piece is 4.5% instead of the 7.5%.
That's correct.
And if we were to fund that piece with the amortization and everything, the approximate additional cost would be approximately $400,000 per year, I believe, and would reduce our
It is you.
total liability. What's that time? Would reduce our total liability by about $26 million. Is that right?
No, that's the
That
total.
seemed, the total is 100 and,
The total on the Board of Ed side is $24 million in liability.
the total, so it reduced that 24 by, if we, by increasing the discount rate, would reduce that 24 to,
It's probably about 7 million, but
7 million.
I don't have that
yeah.
exact
okay.
figure.
Yeah, I got the
That was in
24
that-
mixed up, yeah.
Yeah.
So it reduces by 7 million.
Okay. Any questions before we go any further about how this calculation and how this interplays with our budget?
Generalized
Walsh?
question. Under the ARC calculation, how long should it take us to get to be fully funded? If we completely fund the ARC, how many years?
That's where, well, right now you're using a 30-year amortization. So in theory, all other assumptions exactly realize 30 years, but I made the comment earlier, because your goal is you're actually funding, which is unique, but to your credit, especially with some of the changes that were made, I'd expect we'd experience some gains when we do the 2014 valuation. It'll afford an opportunity to review that amortization policy, and if you want to pay that down quicker, that would be a policy we'd recommend you look at and shorten that period.
Can I follow up on that? A few years ago, our return rates were the same on the pension plan and the OPEB trust, our investment return. We were using 8%. And then we elected as a town to lower the return rate on the pension. I think it was 7.5 and hopefully going lower. What about on OPEB? What did we do on that?
7.5 as well.
So we did do 7.5, so
Yes.
that's where we are right now.
Yes, that's correct.
And is that 7.5, when that discount rate or when that rate of return is applied, what is that assuming in terms of, what's it applied to in terms of our investment amount? Does it
Well,
imply
it's-
we're more funded than we are?
When you compare to what? I mean, it's assuming that you're
Real
invested
dollars.
in asset classes that over the long term are going to earn 7.5%.
Okay, but does it use our actual dollar value that we have on hand that is being actively invested?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's not assuming that we've put more money aside than we have?
No, it's assuming that you're putting in the ARC. So to
Right.
the extent you don't fully fund the ARC, the subsequent ARC calculation would be expected to be more, because every valuation always assumes that, built into the calculation is that you pay the contribution that the valuation,
Yeah, I get it.
is the result of the valuation.
Now, do all these, a couple of years ago, we had you guys, I believe, go through the pension plan and review all the assumptions that were made,
Yep.
right? And you did the same thing with OPEB.
We use the same assumptions, because it's the same group of people.
Okay. Are you going to adjust those assumptions? Now we're coming up and we're going to do a second valuation, right? Because this is the second year.
Right.
So now you're going to go and open this box up again, and you're going to tweak things based on best available information, correct?
Right.
Will you be adjusting a lot of the assumptions on this?
I would not expect to adjust any of the assumptions until another experience study was done. Other than, aside from, the investment return assumption kind of stands on its own and is related to, there could be decisions about asset allocation that require that to be changed, or not. But that kind of stands on its own. For all of the other demographic assumptions, we typically wait for an experience study, which we did not that long ago, so we'd wait to accumulate, a body of experience, evaluate that experience, and make recommendations for changes.
So we did that experience study roughly 2 years ago now when we redid this, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
How often do you see, maybe this is a bad question because I don't really care what others are doing. What is
Right.
best practice?
Best practice would be 3 to 7 years, and 5 is kind of the norm. Some of it depends on how often you're doing valuations. You know, it might be 6 years because you're on the even year cycle. So 4 to 6 years.
Okay. Because the question becomes, if we had any material changes within our census, exorbitant retirements, things of that sort that would impact it, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that becomes a little bit problematic. I mean, you could have a bunch of people go, but then the next year you see very few because they all went the year before. So that's
Right.
why we want a couple of years to get kind of observe a trend and
Right.
take some averages.
Right.
I mean, your group is big enough that we can draw some inferences, but it helps to have multiple years of experience to be able to evaluate.
Is there anything out of line that you're aware of with our assumptions right now, as compared to what you're doing for other clients?
No. No, I mean, we had took that into account in the experience study, and I think, came up with a set of assumptions that, within our, professional experience reflects what we expect to happen for the group. Now, again, we'll continue to evaluate, and we look at it year over year, and when we get into the pension, I'll talk about, again, OPEB, we didn't do a new evaluation, so we didn't look at experience relative to OPEB. On pension, I'll talk a little bit about where the sources of gains and losses were. But again, kind of like when you're looking at investment returns quarter to quarter, we don't try to draw any conclusions from 1 year's worth of data, because it could have just been, a banner year for retirements or a variety of things.
Thank you. Other questions? We have Mr. Walsh. Mr. Becker.
When you do this, revisit this valuation, the changes in the union contracts, you have to take them all into account?
Absolutely.
Because it changes the, as the last couple of contracts have shown, the employees have taken on a greater percentage of their health care costs. So,
Now, when you're talking OPEB, a couple of things. I mean, to the extent there were changes in the underlying plan itself, like on the Board of Ed side, if there's, those are the same plans the retirees. So if they're less costly plans or plan provisions, then that's going to trickle through to the OPEB liability. I don't recall offhand the cost share arrangements, but sometimes they're not necessarily identical for actives versus retirees, but to the extent there have been changes in those plan provisions, they'd be reflected in the next valuation.
okay, some communities have started going to a situation where they don't offer post-retirement health benefits for new hires. So that's going to change the projection, too, if we went in that direction.
Right. Well, all of our valuations are point in time, so we don't have like projected new entrants built into the valuation. So, but to the extent, you froze access to OPEB, you would see, particularly the normal cost component of the ARC calculation, level off and eventually start to decline as the covered population shrunk.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand how you do the valuations. Thank you.
Mr. Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing up the experience study. I mean, that's something, I was there the night that this was voted in, and I'd have to say it's sort of bothered me ever since, every time pension comes up. So you review this in some context each year to make sure we're not completely off, or is that something?
Absolutely.
You do
I mean,
that?
if there was, we look at the gain and loss every year and identify, and we'll get into this when we talk about pension, but what were the sources of the gains and losses? What was the expected liability, and what was the actual liability? And actually, if you take police and fire in the town together, it actually, for the valuation cycle, came out pretty close. Now, turns out on police and fire side there were losses, and on the town side there were gains. But overall, as a large group, they netted each other out. We look at those, but again, don't try to draw any inferences from 1 year. For example, on the police and fire side, most of the losses related to retirement. I would want to see, they weren't so out of line that we would think some kind of immediate change in the assumption, so we'd want to gather a couple more years of experience to see, was it just that there was pent-up demand for retirement, and then we're going to see not as many retirements? Now, if we notice a trend in advance of the 5-year period that we would normally start vehemently recommending a new experience study. If we get 3 years in and we have 3 years running of significant losses on retirement, then we might, recommend that be looked at in more detail and recommend some kind of change before, in advance of an experience study.
So on the retiree side, if you get a big swing like that, it's immediately realized within the numbers moving forward, and from an experience component, everything then levels off. The study still sort of is valid at that point because you've weathered whatever that, you've realized whatever that immediate loss is in your numbers moving forward.
Yeah, unlike assets where there's a smoothing method that kind of delays the recognition of the gain or loss for a 5-year period, liability gains and losses are essentially immediately recognized in the calculation, though the unfunded liability is amortized, so you pay it off over time.
And the other issue on the salary side, the experience study had sort of captured a slower increase sort of period of time, and I think at some stage, and we're already seeing it, some of the contracts are they're normalizing to some extent.
Right.
As of right now, though, you don't see those numbers affecting it too badly yet. I mean, you need even
again, when we get
year.
into the pension, but we did not see.
Yeah, that's more pension question.
And when we do set an assumption, we take that into an account. If there was a period of low, salary inflation, that's why we look at a 5-year period for experience study. Hopefully, we're catching a whole economic cycle. But then we also compare that to long-term inflation expectations and things like that. So just because, maybe if there's 2% contracts going in now, we're not going to use that as a long-term assumption because our inflation assumption long-term is 3%. So we're going to do something, at least as great as our inflation assumption long-term.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this item? Mr. Brown?
For how long have we been funding the ARC for OPEB?
Since the adoption of the standard, I'd have to go back to look. I think you phased into full funding. And I want to say 2 budget cycles ago, you hit 100%.
Yeah.
Which is...
So 30 years includes the 2 years, so it's 28 years to go?
Well, and again, this is why we're going to recommend revisiting the amortization period. It's currently what's called an open amortization, so you're, essentially refinancing the house with every valuation. So
no.
You never pay off the mortgage.
Yeah.
So it's always 30 years?
It's currently always 30, but again, something to be revisited.
So if we were to revisit it and say, no, it's got to be 28, you'd have immediate bump up in the ARC.
Absolutely.
Right. Because it'd no longer be open-ended, and you'd say you got to cut it off there and then start afresh moving forward.
Right. And we can come back with some recommendations, but there's different ways to do it. You could just set one amortization schedule for the current loan, so to speak, the current unfunded liability, run that one down, and then do something like your pension amortization for future gains and losses, do a 15-year or a 20-year, which is more typical for pension anyway.
Any other questions, comments on this? Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, just one feel-good comment. I don't remember exactly, but if I remember correctly, our OPEB funding, even though only 9.3%, is in the top 10% of the, not top 10%, but top 10 towns in the state. Is that?
That's correct. I don't know if I have it committed to memory on funded percentage, but in total size of assets, your trust is number 4 in the state.
That's a sad commentary on the state more than it is a good commentary on us, right? I mean, let's face the facts. I mean, we've got long-term obligations that everybody else has signed up for, and nobody's funding them.
Yeah, Tom, I think that's what the comparison that we took a snapshot at earlier shows.
Right.
You would expect that at this day and age, towns were funding their pension and funding OPEB because the rules all changed, and we jumped on board with that.
Yep.
I'm surprised at the number of towns that aren't.
Yep.
And related to that, I did skip over one bullet point. I do have some slides on GASB 68 that we talked about when we were here last year, but GASB does have on their to-do list for second quarter 2014 the OPEB equivalent of GASB 68, and if you remember from last year, what that's going to do is put unfunded liability right on your books. It's going to move it from a footnote straight to your balance sheet. And they're moving in the direction of doing the same for OPEB, so.
And, Mr. Mayor, this is exactly what I was referring to in a conversation that you and I had regarding the 2-year valuation of OPEB and the fact that actually it's going to end up going on your balance sheet. So you want to be very careful what that valuation is.
Right.
Right, and that would be about 218 before that's all effective, right?
Right. They'll follow the same process. They have to issue exposure drafts, and it'll take a couple years before they get it to a final version.
Right. But it's going to be on our balance sheet. It gets to another topic that I'll save for after pension, but I want to bring it up. But thank you for that, because you reminded us of it. Any other, Mr. Becker?
You mentioned you're going to be bringing a couple of different options to us regarding the OPEB. Is there a timeline on that? Obviously, so it's in advance of maybe next budget, so there's time to think about those adjustments.
Mr. Chair, I believe that's a pension board issue.
Is that
And
gonna
those
go to-
options go before the pension board, and it's the pension board that votes on
Okay.
those.
Okay.
And then they'll, okay, that's fine.
I do have a thought on that, and again, I'll hold it, but it is directly related to the financial statements, so I do want some information on that, since we do sign off on the financial statements as the finance board. So is everyone set on OPEB? Does anybody have anything? All right, seeing none, I'm going to go to the public. Does the public have any questions, rather not questions, I'm sorry, comments on the OPEB discussion? Seeing none, let's go to the pension discussion. This would be pages 328 and 329 in our budget book, and actually, this is very easy to tie it back. I like the 328, the reconciliation schedule is very good. You can pretty much tie the 10.06 right back to this schedule.
So we're on page 3 now of the presentation. And unlike OPEB, you do pension valuations for both of the plans every year. So these are the draft results of the July 1st, 2013 actuarial valuations for both funds, or both plans, commingled fund. So on page 3, you're seeing, a summary of, the 12 results that produced the 13-14 contribution, and then the 13 draft results that are producing a 14-15 number. You see the bottom line numbers for police and fire. It was $3.92 million contribution that's increasing to 5.09. For the town, 4.94, increasing to 4.97, for a total of 8.86, increasing to 10.06 million. So on page 4, just a few comments. The total contribution increased by $1.2 million. If you recall from the projections that we give you, and we'll get to those in a minute, the 5-year projections, most of that was expected, and in fact, the final numbers, when we get to that slide, you'll see came out less than that for 2 reasons. One is you had better than expected investment experience, and you also had net gains on the liability side. But the primary driver of that $1.2 million is, the good news is, and we'll see it in a few slides on the actuarial value of assets versus the market value. You do use a 5-year smoothing method, and you had those, like everyone else, you had those large losses from the 2008 to 2009 that have now finally been fully realized. So all of that has been fully realized, so the last big increase, and again, you'll see this in the projections, the last big jump in the pension contribution is that $1.2 million. The good news is, because of your recent positive experience, you currently have $12.5 million in unrecognized gains. So what that means is, trending forward, as those gains are fully realized, you would expect the contribution to trend downward. There were net liability gains. They were primarily related to, and we do have the data summarized both last year and this year, and you'll see that the total covered population for both plans is down more significantly on the town side. So between a smaller covered group, less than expected payroll, less than expected COLA. We assume, you have on the town side, you have a CPI every year, COLA capped at 3%. We value that at 2.5%. The actual COLA was closer to 1.5%, so you had about a 1% pickup there. Those gains were partially offset by losses on the police and fire side, largely related to retirements. And if you recall, some of those retirements had an added piece to it related to some pay differentials with some promotions on the fire.
Yeah, I think we recall it.
Yes.
And that's now factored into this number?
Yeah, that's all been fully factored into this valuation. So all of those losses have been fully realized with these numbers.
How much, do we know how much that increased the impact this fiscal year?
Well, we had prepared a separate cost estimate, and I apologize, I don't have those numbers committed to memory, but there's...
But that hasn't changed, that estimate is
No,
included.
that was, when we saw the final results, it was very close to our estimate, just related, now that, if you recall, that cost estimate was just looking at the impact of pay increases, not of early retirement. So the cost impact of somebody retiring earlier than we expected is separate from the fact that they got, their final pay was way more than we thought it was going to be. So those are kind of two separate things. We quantified the one in that cost estimate, which was roughly $1 million. It was something just shy of $1 million loss related to that. There's separate losses related, not just to those folks, but on the police and fire in general. There was so many people that expected to retire, and then there were more than that, and so that generated some losses.
Quick question, if you can. So the 10.06, you produce a chart like this. We actually started asking for that chart.
Yep.
A number of years ago that projected out further.
Yeah, and we could, if it's helpful, we can flip to that. That's on page 11.
I actually have that in our budget book too, but the
Yeah.
question I have is, so you're saying that the total expense is 10.06 this
Yes.
year. Last year, what was that projected number?
That's page 12.
It is. Thank you.
So we thought it was going to be 10.56. It's, exactly $500,000 smaller, again, asset gain losses and liability.
Okay.
And again, the good news on the assets is that the gains, the flip side to the smoothing, is that that's spread over 5 years as well.
Thank you.
Quick question on that.
Please.
I remember this from the smoothing, it's a 5-year period, going back, right? So we're still feeling the effects of the bubble. We'll be feeling the effects of the bubble until next year, right? Or have we finally gotten out of it this year?
It's 5 years, but it's from the beginning of the period, because you immediately recognize 20%. So in the 08 to 09 downturn, when we did the July 1st, 2009 downturn, you immediately recognized 20%, and then 80% was deferred over the next 4 years. So it's 5 years altogether, but the first year is the year that the loss happened. So you go out 4 years from July 1st, 2009, you're at July 1st, 2013. This valuation, you're done with the 08, 09 losses.
The numbers that are in front of us.
Yes.
We've finally gotten past that, but there's...
Yeah,
but last year, well, it's funny, because last year's projections seem higher than you're projecting this year. And that's what I'm thinking. Is that part of the issue?
Well, if you look at the pattern's the same. You're...
No, but the number's higher. In year 2012, you went from 10.5, 10.1, 9.6, and now you're at 10, 9, 8, 8.
Right, so we're lower.
So I'm curious.
And those are the asset gains.
But is that, again, us falling off that 5-year bubble period? Is that contributing to that smoothing, or?
Not the 08, 09 bubble. It's you're talking about the rebound?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was factored in. The only new information between the page 11 and page 12, page 11 factors in, again, 2 new bits of information. Page 12 factored in all of those, the rollout of all the gains and losses for every year through 12.
Right.
But you had additional gains in 12, 13 that are then getting realized through the rest of the projection, plus you had liability gains. So that's why, when you go out to 18-19, we were saying it's going to be 10.01, and now we're saying it's going to be 8.51.
Got it.
Any other questions? Mr. Walsh?
In regards to that 5-year smoothing, are there Madoff losses in there, or have they been fully realized?
Yeah, they were, I think they were in that same time period, if not before. I think we actually pushed those back. It might have been a future valuation when they were first, but I think we went back and readjusted everything to reflect the actual timing. And I think recently they were fully written off, but then you've been experiencing some gains related to some money you've been getting back. Yeah, you've been getting back.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's it.
Great. Why don't we move on to the next couple pages?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know how much, I'm certainly open to taking any questions on, we hit page 3 and my comments on page 4. Pages 5, 6, 7 are just some graphical representations. Page 6, we added this year, just so you can kind of see, we do project out the assets so you can see what that smoothing looks like. So on page 6, you're seeing, well, 8 and 9 have now fallen off the graph, but you see that you come back, the market value came back quite nicely, but the actuarial value kind of smoothed out. But now starting, you see it kind of reaches its bottom in 2013 with those losses now fully phased in, and we expect it to just trend up with the market value. Of course, that's assuming that for all future years you're going to earn the 7.5%.
Are you seeing a tendency towards municipalities lowering that rate of return?
That is the trend. You guys were kind of an early adopter on that trend.
Right.
There are still plenty, hanging out 8, even a few, a little north of 8. But, those are, north of 8 is becoming an outlier. I think.
And of course, they're fully funding their OPEB liabilities.
No comment.
Right, yeah. Right.
Wise guy.
Okay. Where is the trend going? To 7?
The median for, it's a little difficult to, do a one-size-fits-all because you need to look at asset allocation. Because to be fair to the ones closer to 8, at least some of them are maybe 80-20, 75-25, so they're, got a lot of risk to justify that return. Don't know that they can still justify the 8. They probably need to come down to 7.75 or maybe even 7.5. But the trend, we do a calculation where we liability weight it as well as just looking at the overall average. OPM hasn't published their new data yet, but the last time we did the calculation, the overall average was 7.5. The liability weighted average was about 7.8. So I see that liability weighted average probably trending down to something around the 7.5. So 7.5 is the new 8%.
Mr. Brockville?
Thank you. As long as we're on that topic, I'd like to ask you a couple
Sure.
of questions about it. I appreciate it. And by the way, thank you, because thank you and thank you to the administration, because somewhere in here there's an important chart, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I actually read the stuff that Mr. Mayor sent out to us a couple of days ago. I don't see it here. That shows what our contributions would be under different investment scenarios.
Yes, and we, that's be an instructive slide to go to. I believe that's
18, thank you.
18, yep.
And thank you, because I myself and others here asked for that for years, actually.
Yes, we will continue to prepare it until we're told otherwise.
I appreciate it, and if it was up to me, we'd go lower than 6%, but I'll leave that to another conversation. But my question to you is, and I know you're an advisor to us essentially,
Right.
but so I'm trying to, and I understand that the pension board makes these final decisions, so I'm trying to, but one thing that we have here in you is somebody who obviously sees towns other than ours. I did some back of the envelope. What I'm trying to get at is how we can justify the 7.5%, okay? And there's actually an excellent article in the Wall Street Journal today, I just happened to come across it, talking about what the proper expected return on bonds is going forward, and it's what I thought it would be, which is simply the current yield. It's the only logical expectation. If you have a 10-year bond yielding 3%, the only logical expectation is to earn 3%. You can't predict, And so we have about a third of our fund currently in fixed income, I believe. And I'm going to just pick a number, say 2.5%, because I know it's a pretty conservative fixed income stuff we own, and probably intermediate in terms of duration. So if we earn we earn, say, 2.5% on fixed income, right, then purely math, this is not Ken Brackfeld's opinion, this is just math, we have to earn in excess of 10% on the rest of the funds in order to earn 7.5% going forward. That's just math.
Right, and assuming you only earn the 2.5 on the fixed,
Yeah, which is the only logical expectation you could have, unless you think we're going to have enormous capital gains from here with these low rates. So, in fact, the reality is probably worse. But leaving that aside,
right,
I'm just asking you, as our advisor, I don't think anybody sitting here who manages their own funds, has 401ks or investments and so forth, could possibly expect to earn 10% going forward on the rest, so to speak, with any confidence, right? So, and I know that we're not at 7.5%. We're not in any way an outlier. Right? In fact, you're saying we're starting to be in the category of the better group, so to speak, of who are trying to make an effort to improve it. And I guess I'm sorry for being long-winded. I'm trying to get where Tom Flynn was actually going, which was, where are we going with this thing? And the reason I asked that is that it really has nothing to do with this year's budget. But I've said this repeatedly at the board here, that we have to make decisions that are not just about this year's budget. We have to make decisions about capital projects and debt service and so forth that can't be made in a vacuum. Because I think the much more realistic numbers going forward are like your 6% number, for example, where it shows contributions that are about double what we're expecting. Right? I mean, nobody has a crystal ball here.
Absolutely.
But just using pure math, I mean, we've had a wonderful year or two in the markets, and everybody's happy about it. But these things tend to even out. So again, I just ask, because how do you guys justify being comfortable at 7.5%?
Yeah, and we're not, obviously the fund's investment advisor. So our job as actuaries is to validate it using long-term capital market assumptions. And whereas you're right in the short term or the midterm even, 10 years, inside of 10 years, most of the assumptions I've seen for fixed income are in that 2 to 4% range. In the short term, it's only when you're looking 20, 25, 30 years out that you can say, okay, over the long haul, we think we're going to return. Rates are going to revert to the mean, and we're going to get. If we hold the bond, if we had individual bonds, maybe we could manage that better. But if you had, you're going to take a hit as rates, revert to the mean. But then a longer term average of, fixed income would be more in the, 5.5% range. So, it's only by using those kind of long term that you can justify, the 7.5.
You can even get there then, because it'd be on a lower base. Because what you're basically saying is, in the early years is where you're going to take the hit. Well, that's what I was trying to say. I mean, 10 years is a long time. You're acting as if, I'm saying, 10 years encompasses this. That's my concern.
Well, and you could use, we've moved one municipality based on those arguments. They went to a split rate. Probably not as much of a deviation as it should have been, but they did a 6.5% for 10 years and 7% thereafter. If you actually project it, and I've seen investment advisors that have done 10-year projections, model a portfolio and say, all right, the mean return for a 10-year period is 6.5 or 6, whereas over a 20-plus year we get, or a 30-year period we get, 7.25 or something significantly higher than that short-term return. So it's only looking at, absolutely a 20-plus year return that you can justify. But again, we would look to your investment advisors and look for their support as well to say, what is the asset allocation you're recommending? And, what are your capital market assumptions?
I mean,
So let me ask you a question. We just did an experience study a year and a half ago, 2 years ago on this.
Right.
Did you have that conversation with the investment advisor and they told you that they were targeting 7.5%? Or did the pension board tell you 7.5%?
Well, a couple of things. With the experience study, that's really we do look at the return, but that's not, it's kind of a different.
So when do you look at it if it's not during the
No,
experience?
no, we do look at it with the experience study, but obviously, the whole, past experience is no indication of, future returns necessarily. So we look at your historical returns, but we're more looking at your current asset allocation and long-term capital market assumptions. And I don't have a copy of the experience study, but I'm sure we ran our own.
So you didn't get it from the investment advisors?
Well, we validate it, and I don't, my partner at the time, Liz Cherney, was more heavily involved in that, so I don't recall exactly everything that went on with all pieces of the study.
Okay.
But we would have, again, as an actuary, we have to validate, is it within our range of reasonableness? And so we validate that, and then we usually have a conversation with the investment advisor to say, what are your capital market assumptions significantly different than ours?
Got it.
What is the target asset allocation?
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to be clear, from the pension board standpoint, those conversations did take place. We tried to get their firm in touch with the investment advisors to make sure that what we're doing was reasonable from that standpoint.
Thank you, Mr. Tetreau. I'll go back. Thank you, too. I will go back to Mr. Brockfeld. Sorry I interrupted.
I appreciate, no, it's no problem. I mean, I just, summing up, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in this. I understand that. And I think,
absolutely.
And I think, for example, the administration deserves credit because some of the newer contracts that we've signed have moved some of the newer workers into 401k style plans and so forth and so on. So I understand there's a lot of different ways to get at this problem.
Right.
I just think that it's just important for us here at the table to understand that when we approve, and this is not really directed at you as much, but when we approve
Right.
spending decisions that are long-term in nature, mostly, long capital projects that are bonded and so forth, I think that somehow or another we're going to have to be a little more cognizant of what we think is more reasonable in terms of the longer-term pension obligations, because it could find us in years going forward with much bigger numbers than, I mean, or smaller, right? I mean, the problem is you
Right.
never know. There's no crystal ball.
Absolutely.
But
One way to get at that
yeah.
is if you look on page, I think you had it on page 12, it's 329 of the budget book where they do the projections going out, where it goes from 10.06 to 9.32 to 8.54
Right.
to 8.63, is to actually make the determination that we want to stay at the $10 million level and quote-unquote overfunded as compared to the ARC.
Which we did 2 years ago.
Which we did a couple of years ago
Right.
when we added back a few $100,000 under the do no harm.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that's what we do.
No, it's one
But it
option.
does represent an option, and it helps us there, and it would also, help us on the two graphs that say we're only at 90-some-odd% funding as opposed to 100% funding. Right.
But we were overfunding when it was like 5 million.
I'm sorry?
We were overfunding a couple of years ago when it was like 5 million, not 10 million.
Right, right.
It's a little bit
Right,
different,
right.
Well, but what I think what I think Tom is saying, which is true, and I think it goes to what Mr. Tetreau has said too, is that there are certain drivers that we've worked very hard as a town and as a board of finance and administration to so-called fully fund, whether it's contributions to various surplus accounts and so forth, and that at some point, when you've reached the level you want and you keep it constant, you're not affecting the tax rate in future years. So one option, which I think is a wonderful discussion for another time, is that we could conceivably say, hey, we got to this $10 million level, we can afford it from a tax rate point of view, and much like insurance, it does no harm. If it turns out that we put a little extra in, it just means that our various ratios and so forth will be better.
Yeah, I think you'd be the first one to admit
Right.
what you're concerned about. You'd be the happiest guy in the room if you were wrong.
Oh, my God, of course. All of us would be, both for the
Right.
town and our personal investments.
Right. Any other comments? Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with respect to this conversation, I think I've recommended this before, specifically when it comes time to have a conversation about the experience study and the interest rates. I think it would be in the best interest of this board as well as the pension board to actually have a joint meeting, have a conversation. I know that the presenter who was here last, I think, has invited members to come, but to actually schedule a joint meeting and joint conversation for some of these particular conversations would be helpful.
Happy to have that meeting with them. They are actually, since they are responsible for that, I think it would actually be them inviting us to that meeting. But I know that there's at least some members of our board, and I can't say that all of our members of our board would not want to go to a meeting like that when the time is right. So thank you. So, Mr. Becker. And then we do want to go to page 5.
In the interest of time, I would merely say I concur with Mr. Brackfeld.
Thank you. Page 5. Mr. Brown. Page 5.
Page 5, I just look at the liabilities from 2011 to 2015, and I see they're up $30 million. Am I reading that right?
Yep.
And the only thing that seems to be 100% sure is these liabilities go up tremendously year after year. And as they continue to go up, and I see the actuarial value is at 164 to 181, I mean, how concerned should we be with that ratio as this continues?
Well, if you look at the page 7, that really gives you a view of what your funding policy. Now, we could rerun this if you were going to do something like was suggested, and instead of contributing the calculated, you were going to say the calculated but never less than 10 million with inflation or 10 million fixed or something like that. You know, that's going to only improve things, again, assuming the 7.5% return.
Right.
But basically, page 7 gives you a picture of the funded ratio. Now, it is an actuarial value, so you've got smoothing working its way through, but you get to the end of the period and, you know, you're fully smoothed in. So basically, you're paying down, you know, roughly 0.5%, you know, a year. So if we extended this graph out, you'd be going from, at least on police and fire here, 93% to 93.5 to 94. You're whittling away at it. And again, like we discussed with OPEB, it is a 15-year open. So it's a much shorter period, and you're doing a fixed dollar amortization. But you're not fixing the loan, so to speak, and guaranteeing it gets paid off. That is one approach that, with some of these ideas about maybe changing a rate, I think you will have an opportunity with 2014, because again, we talked about how you have $12 million in banked gains right now. You know, hopefully your year continues as it's going, and when we get to the 14 valuation, you'll have even more gains. That'll present an opportunity. If there were any changes, you know, again, subject to the pension commission's decisions, you know, if you looked at that, you could revisit, like we talked about with OPEB, the amortization period, and say maybe we go a little bit longer but fix it. It becomes a fixed payment of whatever, $5 million, and we're going to pay $5 million every year for X years, and when it's done, and it's only future gains and losses that then get amortized over that 15-year period.
So just your suggestion is to put a plan like that together, so we can take a look at our options?
Yeah,
or at least scenarios?
Yeah, exactly.
Again, I believe that's something that really needs to be done with the pension board, because it's really their purview in terms of the assumptions and that, and that's why perhaps the joint meeting would make sense, so that discussion takes place.
Yeah, I'm just asking the question. And I like the idea. We talked about it last year. Maybe we just put a date on it when the budget season's over.
They have to invite us.
Okay. I'm sure they will.
Yeah, hope so. Okay.
I'll put it on their agenda.
Any other questions, comments on the pension liabilities? Any other pages somebody wants to go over?
I think most of those graphs were kind of repetitive, one for each plan. And I think we hit all the comments on slide 13. 14 and 15 just give you some recaps of the assumptions. I did summarize the data for you on page 16 and also show you the same slide from last year so you could see what I was discussing earlier. You see the total active count for police and fire was down from 198 to 191, whereas the town was down from 752 to 707.
Yep.
We do have some slides. We covered slide 18. We covered slides 19 and 20 last year. I didn't know if it was worth a refresher. Just reminding everybody that this is upcoming for the town's financials. The 14-15 fiscal year will be the first time that the new accounting standard will come into play. Again, just as a refresher, what you show now is just a number related to your ARC, or the old ARC terminology. And so because you've funded at least the ARC or more, you currently show an asset. You're moving towards a new standard that's going to require you to show a market-related, so not a smoothed asset, but a market assets compared to your liability. So as of the valuation date, you had just shy of $32 million in unfunded liability. So that's the number that'll go in your books.
To that point, and it's a good jumping off point, one of my frustrations has been the timing of getting this report. I would much rather see this report in the fall timeframe for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I think having this discussion separate from the budget process, so then when we look at the budget, it's just the actual, hey, here's the number. Remember, we went through all the permutations of the number back in the fall.
Absolutely.
And secondly, because it always frustrates me, as a frustrated CPA, when I look at the year-end financial statements, that one footnote now, which is now going to be on the balance sheet eventually,
Right.
on the face of the balance sheet, references last year's valuation numbers as opposed to the current year valuation numbers.
Yeah, though that is pretty commonly accepted practice of the municipalities across the state. I just looked at this before the meeting because the question did come up. There's less than 10% that actually
Mr.
report.
Cinefani, our auditor, said
Yeah.
it was a higher percentage, but either way, I don't
Yeah, no, he
aspire
was
to be them.
he was looking at a sampling of like 6 cases. I was looking at the whole.
cases.
Yeah, I was looking at all 120 plans in the state, and there's I think 11 that have a val date, that where they publish a 7/1/13 val, and that's available in the 6/30/13 financials. Now, that said, I'm not saying it's not possible. We would just have to look at your need, and if say you wanted your report November 30, we could work with the town and develop a time frame. Okay, if you need it by then, we need to back up when we need to get the data by to make that happen.
Can we see what it would take to do that? Because I think from a
Absolutely,
a
we could prepare
usability
that
of the
time frame.
financial statements, let's see if we can make that 12 towns.
Absolutely.
From my perspective, and since it is at some point now going to impact the face of the financial statements, in terms of what we're disclosing, I think more current information is more relevant information. And I
Absolutely.
think, does anybody have a strong feeling for or against this, other than myself on the board?
Should we do it? Writing it as a budget action right now?
Yeah. So, and feel free. I don't know what it takes to make that happen. I don't know, but I'd just like it investigated if we could.
We could put together a plan for the town and say, here's the timeline that we would need in order to get all the information and we just need a date. You're looking at October 30, November 30. What's the date you want to have draft numbers in your hand by?
Right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Yeah, those discussions between Mr. Ryer and I have already begun.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. And Ms. Bossy, thank you as well, because I know you have to provide information on it, so I appreciate it. Or at least your team has to provide information on it. Does anybody else have any other questions, comments, concerns before we close it up for the night? Seeing none, I'll go to the public one last time. And seeing nothing from them, do I have a motion? to adjourn. We have Mr. Brown, seconded by Mr. DeWitt. All in favor of adjournment? Those opposed? We're done. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time and effort on our behalf.
Thank you.